We are live. Welcome to The Expert and the Idiot. I'm here today with a true expert, Nick Mutton of Inland Reptile. He's the co-author of 3 books, right?
Correct.
And you've bred 26 python species?
Maybe.
Maybe?
I'll let you know in about another 6 weeks if I hit 26. But
right on. All right. So what got you to this point? The place you're at now, it's way beyond a hobby or an obsession. It's your entire life, and it's
my
been
job.
that way for a while, right?
Yeah, I think I quit my last day job almost 18 years ago. So this has been my profession for almost 18 years.
That's incredible.
I mean, I've been doing it since the early 90s. So I've been doing it for, over 30 years. But
wow.
I think my first carpets were 1994.
Wow. So what is it that drew you to snakes? When did that start? How old were you?
Oh, first grade.
First grade?
I remember going to a private school that was kind of out in the woods, and I remember giving all my you go out at recess and everything, and I would always give my teachers fits because I was catching blue-tailed skinks, garter snakes, gopher snakes, black widow spiders, praying mantis, whatever I could go off the edge of the playground there, flipping rocks and finding critters and bringing them back in like my milk carton from lunch when I was in the first grade and this kind of stuff, and giving my teachers fits. And then, my father was fairly encouraging of that growing up, so I had an assortment of anoles and frogs and this and that over time, and then kind of faded out through high school and all that. And then there was that moment like when you graduated high school and you're moving out and everything, and you realize that you can have any crazy pet you want at that point.
Yeah.
And then I was driving by not far from, actually just a few blocks from where I live now, actually, but there used to be a little pet shop there, and they had like a little board out front, the little reader board that just said, green iguanas, $14.99. And like, yeah, like, fuck yeah, green iguana, that'd be awesome. And so I got an iguana, and then I got another iguana, and then I had 5 iguanas, and then 5 iguanas became increasingly harder to get species of iguanas, running through different spiny tail species. And then I got some monitor lizards, and went through all these different lizards. And then
what year is this about?
What
year was that about?
Oh, this would have been probably 1991, 1992.
Okay.
So well over 30 years ago. And then eventually, have it run through the gamut of all the lizards that interested me. I got my first snake, which was a Bali locality reticulated python, which was the most horribly ill-suited for a first snake thing you could ever imagine. It's like your first snake, so you get the longest species of snake in the world that are totally unpredictable temperament. And if you've ever messed with retics, it's like, there's a lot of people want to claim how tame their retics are because it's better for business if people believe that, but they're kind of shady. They're not like seek and destroy all the time, but they're one of those snakes that will lure you into a false sense of security. And it everything's fine, then they'll snap right at your face. It was one of those kind of snakes. So. And one snake becomes many snakes becomes trying to breed snakes. And then it just kind of grew slowly but steadily.
And that's about when you met Ryan Young?
Oh, yeah. Now, I was probably 21, 22 when I met Ryan. So I'm going to be 52 this year. So I've known Ryan for a better part of 30 years.
Both from Washington?
Yeah, he's from the other side of town. There's the main city, and there's the valley, which is this kind of extension that goes out east towards the Idaho border. And he lived out there, but he worked at a pet shop, so I knew him from that and everything. And we were just newbie ding-a-ling hobbyists, really. Didn't know nearly as much about anything as we thought we did.
Yeah.
So we kind of came up in the hobby together.
So when did you get into the carpets?
Ooh, 1993, 4. in that window. It's a little, I mean, when you get on 30 years, it's hard to remember the exact year, but
Sure. But 2 or 3 years
93,
into, okay.
93, I think. I got my first carpets. I drove with some other friends that were dingling reptile hobbyist newbies at the time too. And we drove from Spokane, Washington, where I live, all the way to San Diego, which is literally like almost a 30-hour drive. It's insane. Drove all the way. But in those days, in the early to mid 90s, the biggest show on the West Coast was the San Diego Reptile Expo. So we drove all the way to San Diego, and I bought my first carpets there. And then that's where it started. It very nearly was short-tail pythons. I couldn't decide whether to get these carpets or these Borneo short-tail pythons. And
No kidding.
fortunately, I made the wise choice and got the carpets. And then the rest is history, I guess.
Wow. When did you get out of lizards, or do you still keep them?
I have a love-hate relationship with lizards. Like, I want to like lizards. I want to keep lizards, but lizards are a pain in the ass. I don't know if you keep any lizards, but anybody listening out there, lizards, pythons are the lazy man's pet. That's just the facts of it. Like, let's be honest. Like, even a colubrid is a lot more work than a python. Pythons have such a slow resting metabolic rate that you feed them once in a while, they crap once in a while. They're not that demanding. Lizards having to eat all the time with a much higher metabolic rate. They're more active. They trash their cages. They're just more work. So currently I own, I don't know how many lizards I have. I in my house, there reside several lizards. So I have a huge cage in my living room with a trio of young adult Similus spiny-tailed iguanas, because I've just always really liked those. They're not worth anything. I just really like them. So I have I don't know why, because they just mess their cages up, sneeze all over the glass, destroy everything, chase each other around. It's chaos. But I've got a trio of those that are basically adults. There's a couple of lone female crested geckos, a planted vivarium full of mourning geckos that I don't know how many mourning geckos are in it, and I could be off by as many as 20. I don't even know. They just, since they're parthenogenic, they just lay eggs, the eggs hatch. You see them. I don't know how many are in there.
Do you ever use those to get snakes started?
That's why it started, and then I never have fed one to anything. I've never done it. I've never done it. I got like, but I just like can't hurt myself to do that. Like, that was the initial impetus for doing it, but they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they're also, I underestimated how impossible they are to catch. You know how hard it is to catch a small mourning gecko without squishing it? Like, they're so tiny. Like, no, don't feed those off. And there's a handful of leopard geckos that lay eggs on accident sometimes.
Right on. What happened to that first retic?
I don't remember. That one's lost to the sands of time. It didn't die. I probably got sick of it trying to bite me in the face and traded it away to somebody who's probably less equipped to take care of it than me, knowing myself back in those days. But I don't know. I wish I still had it. I actually have a pair of Bali retics right now. Back in those days, that was before all the federal legislation, the Lacey Act nonsense and all that, where you could get that stuff and it was cheap. So getting a Bali locality retic was not hard at all. Now that stuff is vanishingly rare. If you look at Morph Market on a typical day, there's about 1,000 to 1,200 retics for sale. I can tell you with almost total confidence that if you were to go through all 1,200 ads today, 0 of them will be a pure Bali retic. There will be none. There will be probably fewer than 20 that are even pure of anything at all. They're basically, the retics are, the gene pool is so wrecked that it's basically entirely exists only as hybrids. Because of people, they want this morph and that morph. It's all about the morphs, nothing matters unless it's a morph. So of course you're going to breed this species of retic to this other species of retic, because you got to get those morphs together. You got to make your super dwarf albinos and this sort of nonsense. And it ends up, and for a good long while now, you've not been able to replenish the gene pool with fresh wild stock. So, doing that practice, it's basically, you're just pissing in the gene pool for everybody else who comes swimming after you. You've peed in the pool. That's literally what it is. And now the pool is mostly pee. And that's just the reality of it. It's like, you would be one of the hardest pythons to find is a pure Malaopython reticulatus, because virtually all of those 1,200 retics will have some percentage of dwarf blood. Well, spoiler alert, the dwarf retics aren't retics. They're a different snake that's related to retics in that same complex, but they're not. They're a distinct entity. So all
Mm.
those little, this percentage, that percentage, they're all hybrids, all of them. So it's really difficult as I try to, my long simmering little friendly competition with my buddy Ryan over who's bred the most species. Like at some point, I don't want to breed retics, but you got to do it. So now I've like, of the 4 species of retics, yeah, I said it, 4 species of retics. I've got 3 of them now.
Mm.
The last one I need is the one undescribed species that is clearly its own species, though. The data and the genetic data is abundantly clear that they are their own thing.
Can you break that down a little
The
bit?
genome there's no ambiguity at all. The fact that nobody slapped a name on it doesn't make any difference. It's a different thing. It's abundantly clear. But they're huge, and I don't want them. I don't want to do it. Like I've got to get them.
Can you break that down, the 4 species?
I don't want to break down the 4th species because if I do that, then I might accidentally inadvertently raise demand for them or something, and it might make it harder for me to get some. You basically have a well-defined eastern and western clade of retics, and those are different at the full species level. And then among the eastern western clade, you've got a couple of subspecies. But let's be fair, those subspecies, the salar subspecies and the super dwarf, all that stuff, which the hobby makes a big deal out of this island, that island. It's mostly a bunch of hooey. I mean, most of those islands where those retics came from 12,000 years ago, 18,000 years ago, it was one island. It's only been broken apart in post Pleistocene sea level rise in the early Holocene as the glacial North American and European ice sheets melted, sea level rose 450 feet. So this one island became multiple smaller islands, but 15,000 years is not enough time for genetic drift to have had any real effect. So I'm saying is if you had a Karompa retic and a Madu retic, there is no difference between them at a molecular level. You can't tell them apart by looking. You can't tell them apart by their DNA because they just haven't been separated long enough to have developed a unique identity at a molecular level anyway. So that stuff's a bit overstated. But there again, those retics, they're a subspecies because sometimes taxonomists take shortcuts. And when they did those papers, it cost a fair amount of money to have molecular testing and analysis done. And so there's a trend in the hobby that's not particularly helpful, I don't think. It's not in the hobby, in academia, where they want to slap a name on a thing that they know good and well is a different thing. If they say it's a full species, which it clearly is, then the burden of proof is higher. And they're like, well, how are you going to name it as a full species? You didn't even do any DNA. But if you name it as a subspecies, somehow that is an easier bar to clear in academia. It draws less ire if you don't use DNA and you only name it as a subspecies. So what they'll do is they'll name it as a subspecies, knowing full well it's a full species, but they don't have the money because academics, generally speaking, don't have any money. They have to find a way to get somebody else to pay for their research. And there's nobody's paying for research into whether little retics on islands are a different species because there's no money available for that, generally speaking. So they do a down and dirty thing, name it as a subspecies, and then wait, and eventually some poor schlub later on will look at the DNA and will raise it to a full species, but they'll have to use their name. So you see that in a lot of pythons. There's currently a few subspecies of green tree python that are obviously full species. Obviously, the DNA work done in that paper clearly shows they're full species, subspecies. The dwarf Burmese pythons are clearly not Burmese pythons. They are clearly a different species, but they don't want you to do any DNA because it costs money, so they just named them as a subspecies. And someone else later will sequence it and like, oh, it's a full species, but they'll be locked into having to use that name because that's how the system works. So that is that's me getting off on a tangent about retic phylogeny, I guess. But
so there's a chance that I could end up being able to own a retic in Florida.
Probably not, because Florida is the worst place in the world to be a herper. It literally, you live there. It went from being the best place in the country to be a herper to the shittiest place to be a herper.
Yeah.
I hear there's promising things on the horizon where it might not get a lot better, but it'll at least stop getting worse. They got some new leadership down there in that department, but they're never going to make it easier. Their policy is and will continue to be, they banned X, Y, and Z. And if X, Y, and Z later are shown to be different species and get changed into different categories, they will remain banned. Everything that used to be, you know, amethystina for, you know, Cymalia amethystina. Well, Cymalia amethystina is like 9 different frickin' species. They're not official species, they're species. As somebody who's privy to that information and is doing that research, there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of, basically everything you thought you knew about scrub python taxonomy is wrong. Almost, well, virtually all of it is wrong. It's a mess. Getting that teased apart, it'll change that, but they will just continue to be banned because they used to be banned when they were this, and now they're not that. They have to be banned. So they're not going to let you off the hook, probably.
Yeah. At least I got my Timors.
That's the state of Florida's nonsense. That's not necessarily the federal government. How the federal government, they're going on what U.S. Fish and Wildlife says, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife does eventually update taxonomic situations, but it takes them forever. Like, okay, in 2003, Tannenbar pythons were, and Classilepis and Halmahera pythons were split off from Amethystina as their own species. And about a decade after that paper, Fish and Wildlife finally recognized the Tannenbar pythons were a thing and recognized Cymalia nata as a name. But it took them like a decade. So even if a paper comes out, it's going to be at least a decade before the federal government. And at that point, I don't know what they will do. Because when you move things around, it's like, well, that's no longer this. Now you banned Amethystina, but you banned, Reticulatus. Well, this is not Reticulatus. This is this other thing. I don't know how the federal government will deal with that. But it's the government, so probably not in our favor, I suspect. Just
the closest
call me a
I
pessimist, but I'm doubtful they'll go easy on us.
The closest I could get to a retic in Florida was the Timor pythons.
Yeah, which is stupid because they're way bigger than some of the retics.
I know.
It doesn't make any sense, but when politicians making legislation about things they don't even understand, and all they're really doing is introducing legislation that lobbyists for animal rights groups like Humane Society of the United States, they're the ones who write these terrible bits of these bills, and they just hand them off to politicians along with a healthy campaign contribution for their reelection. And then that politician introduces a bill that they never even fucking read, that was written by some special interest group who basically bought their vote and paid them to do this. And that's how this stuff happens. And I don't even know if politicians are malicious. I just think they don't care. I think they care about getting a check from HSUS or PETA or whoever. That's what they care about. And they don't read these bills. They don't understand this stuff. So it doesn't matter if it's complete lunacy. They're not even going to understand it because their basic comprehension of the issue is so, frankly, non-existent that they don't know what they're doing. It's like, sounds good. Sure, we don't want giant man-eating pythons in Florida. That sounds like a good thing, right? If you don't know anything about anything.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good idea. It sounds like they think, well, will this be popular with voters, and will I get a campaign contribution for doing this? And if the answer to both those is yes, then you're screwed. And the answer is probably yes on both those cases. So,
yeah. So, what were your first carpet pythons, if you can remember?
Oh, I remember. It's kind of a bit ironic because I've kind of become the poster boy for keeping things pure and not making hybrids. I'm kind of militant about it. And my first carpets were diamond coastal intergrades. At the time, in my defense, I was a much younger man. I had a full head of luxurious hair. That's gone. Didn't have all this old man gray beard stuff. I was a much younger chap. And so my understanding of, the relationships between species and how this stuff all works was very different and vastly incorrect, frankly. So I knew that it had been well published that diamond pythons and coastal carpets interbred in the wild. That was a common belief. And so that's what made it okay. Well, it's like, well, they interbreed in the wild, so this isn't really a hybrid, really. This is a natural thing that happens, which is a complete misunderstanding of that whole phenomenon, which is, adaptive introgression. But that's not, basically, if you go there are no place where coastal carpets are just breeding where you got coastal carpets and diamond pythons roaming around, they run into each other and make a clutch of eggs. That's not what happens at all. You have an area where every snake in that area has heritage from both species, where every snake in this band, they're all intergrades. So you don't have diamond pythons breeding with coastal carpet pythons. You have intergrades breeding with intergrades. and they're not even intergrades. They should be hybrids, because the southern coastals, which are not the northern coastals that we have in the hobby anyway, it's a totally different snake. The southern coastals should be a full species. They are as genetically distinct from everything else as a diamond python is. So why are they a subspecies? They shouldn't be. They should just be Morelia mcdowelli.
Interesting.
So that was my first 2 years. I made diamond coastal intergrades. And then I started to wise up about the hybrid thing, and I parted with those animals. And ironically, many years later, about 9 years later, I was at a local pet shop just getting crickets for whatever gecko I had at the time. And I had sold that first clutch I ever produced was 23 eggs, and it was 21 males and 2 females. It was the most insane male heavy clutch ever. So I sold a few. I traded like 3 of these males to the local pet shop for just for a bunch of feeders. And I was very concerned that they would get sold and misrepresented since they were integrated. So I wrote up this whole little thing, and they stuck it on the little fish tank back in the day for people who are interested that these were locally produced by a local breeder and what they were exactly. Doing everything I could to make sure those hybrids were honestly represented, because don't you know, if they're honestly represented, it won't cause a problem, which is of course nonsense. It always causes a problem. So like 9 years later, I'm at that same pet shop, and there's one of those snakes as an adult is back at the same pet shop. The person moved like Hawaii and couldn't take snakes to Hawaii, and they just like gave it back to the pet shop they got it from. And after, it's almost a 10-year-old snake, a full-grown adult, and there was the snake that I was so careful to make sure it was represented honestly as a diamond coastal intergrade with all the details and all that information, and there it was, labeled as a jungle carpet. It's like, here it was, like my own snake that I did everything you could possibly do that most people would never do, just to make sure this didn't happen. 9 years later, jungle carpet, because that's what they thought it was. They didn't know.
Wow.
So that just kind of solidified things. So,
what did you get into after that?
Well, actually, I got into things simultaneously. The first year I bred any pythons, I bred at least 4 clutches of carpets my first year trying to breed anything. So I had a clutch of popwing carpets, I had 2 clutches of jungle carpets, and I had a clutch of diamond coastal intergrades. First ones to hatch were the diamond coastal intergrades. But I also hatched, and actually the founder for the entire Ivory Jungle project hatched that very first year, way back then. It was a weird baby that wouldn't eat, but it was really odd looking out of one of those small jungle clutches. And I just hatched, 9 generations, and 26 years later, I just hatched direct linear descendants of that original founder animal.
That's
after
incredible.
all that time. It's got to be the longest running selective breeding project in pythons. I can't think of anything more than that. I'm sure there's some chondro guy that will pipe up and talk about chondros and lines that go back to the 70s, but it's not a selective breeding line if you're just putting snakes together with no goal in mind. It's a lineage that still exists, but if there's no goal, it's not really a selective breeding project. So, now I'm going to step in it and get a bunch of hate mail from the chondro people.
So where'd you go after that? I mean, did you just keep reinvesting, and everything you sold, you would get more animals and cages?
Yeah, initially, there was a lot of that initially. You'd produce 20 of one thing and you'd sell them to move up to the next thing or what have you. I was pretty low key though till probably around 99. It was 99. I got my first Brettles pythons. God, that's 25 years, a quarter of a century ago. But at the time, even way back in $1999, they were $5,000 a pair.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I got 2 pairs, which at the time was a huge sort of gamble for me. 10 grand, and I was, I was not a well-known breeder or anything like that. All the aspirations in the world, perhaps, but I wasn't a known commodity or anything. So that was a lot of money relative to income in 99 to get my hands on those snakes. But it worked out. And then when I did, I paid basically $5,000 a pair, and then the price completely imploded while I had my first eggs incubating, because they take 4 years to mature. So I paid that. And then in 2004, I'm incubating eggs from my 1999 babies. And that was the year that someone started selling them for $500. So the price declined from the time I bought my animals to the time I was able to sell animals. The price dropped 90%. 90%. And this is one of those things that people in the hobby think they don't really understand. It's like, you're not trying to make all your money back on one egg. It's like, even with that 90% price drop, I made all of my initial investment back plus a little bit extra the very first year, even with that catastrophic price drop, because I hatched 37 of them. So it added up. And then over the years, that was turned out to be one of the most ridiculously profitable things I've ever done. Similarly with the hypobrettles many years later, that was not cheap to get that pair of snakes. It was a ridiculous amount of money. But, if you have confidence, you can get them to breed and produce them and everything over time, it works out really well.
What'd you get into after that?
I think there's only 3 species of python that you can actually even obtain that I've never had. I've never owned a Boelen's python. Technically, I own some Papuan olive pythons, but they're not here. So I've never actually maintained one. That might be it, actually.
Why not the Boelens? Do you plan on getting some?
No, I just don't give a shit. They're not special. They're all right. I'm just going to be here to piss on everybody's parade, I guess. Like, I turned down Boelen's pythons all day long when they were $750. I didn't care then. I'm sure as shit not going to care at $13,000 a piece for a lone male. You got to be out of your mind. Like, they're not that special. They are just a montane scrub python. And I like all the other scrub pythons just as much. I have a ton of scrub pythons. I don't hold the Boelen's pythons in some high regard. The prices are ludicrous. I'm not into, people profiteering and price gouging. I'm not playing with that. I'm just not interested. Also, I know what it would take to breed them and to be successful. And if I'm going to spend that kind of money or any money on anything, I'm not going to obtain animals and not, I know what it takes to breed them. So, and if I can't realistically provide that without moving heaven and earth to do that, then what will be the point? Just spending a ton of money and a ton of time and years of your life to fail? I'm confident I could breed them, but because I know what they need to do that, it's not a kind of thing you can't just stick them in my snake building. Or I would just be one guy out of a million guys that has a pair of Boelen's pythons that breeds like crazy every year and never lays any damn eggs. Because there's a lot of that, isn't there? A lot of people got them, and Boelen's pythons love to breed. They don't love to ovulate. To get them to ovulate is a different thing. And the temperature parameters of how they need to be kept, you can't. It's like why my diamond pythons are not in any of they're not in my snake building at all. They're in my house because I can't keep the baseline ambient air temperature right for them. It's either they're going to be too cold, they're going to be way too hot, or everybody else is going to be way too cold. And so, I would have to do Boelen's pythons. I would have to build another reptile room. And frankly, I don't know where that would even be. I have a snake building that has an adult, actually I have 2. I have a baby room for growouts and yearlings that's in one little building. And then I've got an attached building that's attached to that's my adult building. Then I got in my office in my house, there's a baby room in my office for newly hatched babies. I have a walk-in incubation room. It's like, my house is not that big. There's nowhere to put another room. It's like that can get to the temperatures I need it to be. So I couldn't do them justice. So it's best not to do it at all. And the prices are just absurd. It's just nuts.
What's required to get them to ovulate?
What
do you need to do to get them to ovulate?
All right. I don't give away all the secrets to everything, but basically, everybody keeps their snakes way too fat, way too well fed, and way too warm. And if you do those things, they'll actually live for a long time. They'll never lay any eggs. And there's a psychological component to this, and that is that we have all sort of learned directly or indirectly that a healthy snake, a healthy python in particular, has a really good appetite, doesn't it? A healthy snake will eat. And if your snake doesn't eat, it's usually the first thing you think is there's something wrong with this snake, isn't it? Right? So we tend to use, on an unconscious level, we use food response as a barometer of health. Since I must not be doing anything, I must be doing everything right because the snake keeps eating. Because if I was doing things wrong and the snake wasn't healthy, it would stop eating. That's in our psyche. That's the way we think. So when someone pays $12,000 or whatever absurd amount of money for a stupid Boelen's python, they overfeed the damn thing because they spent so much money on it. They want to see it eat all the time because they think that this is giving them feedback that they're doing everything right and they're not fucking the snake up. But in fact, that is fucking the snake up because snake is not supposed to eat all the time. And this is a common problem with all the scrub pythons, is that they get way too big and way too fat, and they don't breed. They can't effectively thermoregulate properly at that sizes, because when you're a bit bigger and stockier, your core gets thicker and you don't lose temperature enough. So if you look at like a little tiny snake, a really skinny snake, and you took a temp gun during the day and you temped it, and then it got down to, let's say it got down to 65 degrees at night, and you tempt it, just before the lights came on in the morning, it would be basically the ambient air temperature. It would have lost all its body heat. It'd be about 65 degrees. If you do that with a big blood python or a big thick python, you'd be shocked at how little heat they actually lose, because their body insulates itself, and they will not lose, their core body temperature won't drop that much. And so you're not able to provide that stimulus as effectively as you think you are. So you end up keeping them in accidentally, even though you think you're keeping them the right temperature, you're keeping them too warm because they're too big and fat. And that's why. And the reason why so many Boelen's python people fail is just that. It's like they can't stomach the idea that the road to success is to pay a ton of money for a snake, and then once you get it, you have to freeze its balls off and starve it half to death. They just can't do it. Like to keep it like at temperatures that would be kind of iffy at night for a lot of other things, and then also on a bare bones minimalist diet, like they just can't. It's like, but if you keep it at 80 all the time and you feed it all the time, it'll never get sick, but it will never breed. And this is why people fail. They also, and this is me rambling on, I look at, oh my God, half hour, haven't even got to this subject yet, but I'm terrible about this. But this is an important thing that people should understand if they want to be successful breeding pythons, is body condition. And it's just keeping everything so warm and so fat all the time. We're shortening their life expectancy. We're cutting their reproductive output down. It's nuts. And people, they just keep doing it and keep doing it. And they don't, like I'm constantly asked, like I sell a lot of snakes. I produce a lot of snakes, and at least twice a week I have somebody ask me, they'll send them whatever, and like, what's its feeding schedule? And I'm like, feeding schedule? What are you talking about? Like as if these pythons in a tree in the wild that are like, well, it's Tuesday, I guess we get to eat today. It's like, no. Pythons have a good appetite typically because they don't get to eat very often. They are programmed to eat whatever they can, whenever they can. But nature pumps the brakes. Nature ensures that is not that much and not that often. That most of the time, the prey animal gets away. Most times if they try, they fail. And so you might eat 3 times in 1 week, and it might be something the size of a freaking chicken, something the size of a mouse, and something, and something even smaller. And there's no rhyme or reason to the size or whatever it is. You get what you can when you can. And that's what you got to go with. And you have to work your ass off to get it. And then we put these things in a plastic box. They don't move. They don't get any exercise. They don't exhibit normal behavior. They burn 0 calories. And then the food shows up, and the food's already freaking dead. They don't even got to kill it. They just got to swallow it. So we're just like, we've made a bunch of couch potato snakes that are kind of unhealthy. That's why our snakes are so prone to obesity and why they have reproductive complications. I wouldn't say fortunate, because when you say things like I've been fortunate, it implies a certain amount of luck was involved. But I've made it a priority in my life to travel all around the world and chase snakes on other continents and stuff, because that's an awesome thing to do, and I highly recommend it. And I found a fair number of pythons in the wild, and I have yet to find an obese one. When you get like a fat python or a boa, and they get those like vertical like creases where the scales are kind of folded over and parallel lines going down their body?
Yeah.
I have caught a shitload of wild pythons, and I have never seen that, not even once, and I don't think I ever will. Wild pythons don't have excess body fat. They don't have the luxury of having surplus body fat. But our captives that just sit on their ass on a fucking paper towel, and the food just shows up, and even the food we feed is too good. The stuff they're eating in the wild, they're lucky if they get some half-starved, scraggly-ass rat that's half dead. That's what you're going to get. The rat doesn't have any body fat. But what do we feed? Lab rodents that are fed on a balanced laboratory diet. We're feeding rats that are too well nourished. The rats have body fat, way more fat than they can sometimes process, which can lead to health problems. It's like we're feeding them the reptile equivalent of eating Doritos or something. It's like too much fat content, whereas wild prey is inherently leaner. And so we're feeding, and there's no way around rats. Not feeding rats, I suppose, might be difficult to find a workaround for that. But there's a reason why people have reproductive failure in their pythons, and it's not the snake's fault. It's mostly our fault as keepers. We do things for our own convenience that are economical for us, or out of like well-intentioned ideas that are just wrong. People overfeed everything because they think things are supposed to be bigger than they are. This is a huge one, and it's my current crusade, so I guess I'll go into it. And that is this idea of, like, again, twice a week I get asked like questions from people that invariably don't buy snakes from me, but they'll ask me questions like, "Oh, I'm really interested in this Irian carpet," which is a thing that doesn't exist, but that's a whole nother thing. But you can't be an Irian carpet if there's no such place as Irian. There just isn't. So that's not a thing. But the guy wanted the Irian carpet because he's read on the internet that it stays smaller. And like, no, it doesn't. Like, what? Snakes don't have a finite adult size. Like mammals, we are genetically limited in how tall we're going to get, aren't we? We don't just keep eating more food and hit 9 feet tall. There's a hard limit, and our genes regulate that. There's a tiny bit of wiggle room when you're young and growing. If you eat more protein when you're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, you might squeak out another inch or two, but that's about it. Other than that, it's genetically determined. Reptiles and snakes in particular, things like snakes and crocodiles, are what are termed indeterminate growers, meaning there is never a point where they stop growing. So there is no such thing. The idea of maximum size is a fallacy. There is no maximum size because they continue to grow forever. After the onset of sexual maturity, after a certain point, it slows way down. And it gets very slow, but if you keep feeding them, they'll just keep growing. So you end up with people with just like these enormous snakes that are way bigger than they're supposed to be. Wild snakes have the natural environment to contend with, and that puts a limit on how big they get. They can't outgrow their food supply. They don't have the luxury to just keep growing forever, because there's not enough to eat, and that kind of pumps the brakes. But in captivity, the food just shows up. There used to be a really well-known jungle carpet breeder. I won't mention him, but super nice guy, well-respected, great guy. Got some snakes from him. Nothing but great things to say about him. Will Leary was his name. I'll say his name. Will Leary, great guy. Everybody remembers him and likes him. He's a universally beloved guy. But he sent me pictures of a snake he had, a female jungle carpet that he named Rebecca. I don't know why he named all the snakes that don't have ears. But, and he was telling me how big it was. He said, "Oh, she's at least 10 feet. And this man sends me a picture of this jungle carpet that was, I think, about 11 feet. And he had an 8-foot ceiling, and he was kind of a tall dude. And he's holding this snake about 2 feet. So there's about 2 feet of snake on the other side of his hands. He's got her neck, but there's like head and 2 feet of snake. Then there's his hand. His hand is touching the 8-foot ceiling, and there's like at least a foot of snake on the ground still. It is absolutely the biggest jungle carpet I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, and guess what? Rebecca never laid a single egg and died at 8 years old. It fucking dropped dead. Because it was the equivalent of 1,000-pound person. It's like, can you have 1,000-pound person? Yeah, you can. For a minute, for a short window of time, you can be 1,000-pound person. But how many offspring are you going to leave behind before you die very young? Not very many, because you're not supposed to be that big. So there is no such thing as maximum size, because they'll just keep growing. What you feed it makes all the difference in the world. Sometimes there'll be a slight difference in the size of the onset of sexual maturity. But if you want to make a jungle carpet 10 feet long, I probably could dig up a picture of one. It won't live very long. And the snake that should live 20, 25 years is dead before its 10th birthday. But so that's, yeah. But this ties into everything. If you want to breed your scrub pythons, your Boelen's pythons, quit overfeeding them. Since they don't have a finite adult size, no python does, nor do crocodiles or a bunch of other things. That's why occasionally you'll see some ridiculously giant crocodile, because it's like 100 years old. It just lived so long that if it lives long enough, it will eventually achieve this gargantuan size. They don't usually live that long, but if left to their own devices, and they're lucky and they last a century, they will. This is one of the single biggest causes of reproductive failure in pythons, people overfeeding them. And the other flip side of that is they conflate two different things: maximum size with adult size. So when this is rampant with the scrub pythons, they think, well, scrub pythons can get 15 feet long. So I need to feed my scrub python until it's 15 feet long. You're like, what? Like, that's insane. But that's what they do. They think they feed their animal to achieve what they expect the adult size would be. And that's usually the record size specimen. It's like, oh, I'm constantly about, well, coastal carpets can get 10 feet long. It's like, no, they don't. Like, that's crazy. Because one person found one snake that was 10 or 11 feet long doesn't mean they get that long. I'm not much of a sports fan, but the analogy I usually use is, if you're anybody is familiar with the NBA over the last 10 years, remember Yao Ming, the Chinese basketball player who was over 7 feet tall?
Yeah.
Think about this. Would you look at Yao Ming and say, well, fuck, I guess Chinese dudes are 7 feet tall? No, that's insane. You wouldn't say that. He is the outlier. It's like everybody else is considerably less than that. You don't base the adult size projection on the record specimen because there's always those outliers. You have to toss them out. It's like,
yeah,
well, everybody knows that the record length for a green anaconda is like 32 feet. Fun fact, the average adult female green anaconda is 17 feet and about a third the mass of the 32-foot one. You're never going to find another 30-foot green anaconda, but they always trot that number out. That's a one-off anomaly. That is a million-year-old snake that didn't get the memo that it never got eaten, it never died, it just had got lucky and lived a long time and achieved a huge size. That's not the typical story.
Speaking of
15 feet long, but fun fact, if you want to breed them, wait till they're about 7 or 8 feet and they'll breed really easy. When you get them big, they never breed.
what do you think of that new anaconda that was discovered?
I think it's bullshit. The paper has a lot of flaws in it. And as somebody who dabbles in these sorts of things, it's even to me, it's apparent. I think you have a few things. When you name a new species, you need to do a few things. You need to show, how is this new thing different from this other thing that you're splitting? What are the diagnostic characters that split them? And where? And you don't, well, the why is not necessarily completely necessary. It's kind of bad form to leave it out. And all they had was the what. These things are different for this reason. And where the line is between them, no attempt to answer that question. Why that would be the case, no attempt to answer that question. So it's like a three-legged stool. The how, the why, and the where. And they only have one leg of a three-legged stool. And your stool falls over with only one leg. It just, basically, if you read the paper, it appears that it's all based on virtually nothing but genes and not much in the way of genes. And it basically, they just gradually become the other thing over a cline. That's not a different species. That's what's called a cline. If one thing slowly changes another thing over hundreds of miles, and you can't draw me a line where one stops, the other one starts, even if the line is a little bit blurry, it's because it's the same thing. It's because it's the same thing, and that's what you got. So I'm extremely skeptical of their findings.
Okay.
Usually you don't have speciation doesn't occur unless there's a barrier to gene flow. Because if there's no barrier to gene flow, things never speciate. You need to have reproductive isolation. One population splits into two daughter populations that can't interbreed anymore, and over time, genetic drift takes hold, and you end up with two different things, which takes a while. Sometimes you'll have situations where things become separate for a while, but not fully speciated, and then the situation will revert to an earlier state where they are allowed to interbreed again, and you end up with things like, which is probably what this anaconda thing is, where they're partly diverged, but then now they've come back together, and so, but they didn't quite get all the way there, so you have that. You see that with carpet pythons. You have things that are in contact now, like the diamonds in the southern coastals. It's not just diamonds in southern coastals. There's a few skinks, there's some birds, there's a bunch of things that have two populations, one that roughly correlates where you find diamonds, one that populates where you find the southern coastals, and the zone in the middle are hybrids. If you look at biogeography and if you look at their genomes, it looks like there used to be a barrier that prevented the animals in the south from the animals in the north from meeting up and breeding and allowed them to speciate into different things. And whatever that barrier was is no longer there, and now they can kind of come together and integrate the genes integress in that area. It's like there was a barrier that isn't there anymore. What that was, I can't tell you. Nobody can. But that's what the genes show, that there used to be something keeping them separate, and now there isn't. And that thing is now gone. But big sufficient biogeographic barriers are, deserts, oceans, sometimes extremely wide rivers, things that stop, and it doesn't need to stop gene flow completely. It just needs to stop it mostly, and things will wander off. If the occasional animal makes it around a barrier once in a while, it doesn't really make much impact. Well, I mean, you and I talking about this, we are hybrids. We are not even a pure species. We have archaic DNA from at least 2 other species of archaic hominid in both of us. So we're hybrids. So the idea that like that matters in taxonomy is like, well, I don't know. If it's like a bunch of people who are hybrids talking about snakes that are hybrids. The irony is not lost on me, because you have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA and a small percentage of Denisovan DNA. I might have 3 archaic hominid species in me. I might have
get that checked out.
What?
I said I should get that checked out.
Yeah, I don't think there's a test for the Denisovan DNA component yet, but the Neanderthal stuff they can tell pretty accurately. Since I've got a fair amount of West African genes, complements of slavery, in my genome, West African populations in a certain area have a little bit of a very, very small contribution from a super archaic hominid that we don't even know what species that was. But in their genome, you see this little bit of DNA from yet another that's not a Neanderthal and not a Denisovan. It's like another. The story of humanity and early humans of whatever species is they spread out, and wherever they go, if they run into any other earlier versions of humanity, they have sex with them. That's the story of humanity in every single case. Every case. It's like if we run into anything that's even remotely people-like, we bang them. That's what we do, apparently. It's true. It's like, yeah, we know that Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred with each other, that both of them interbred with modern humans, that it's like the Denisovans interbred with late surviving Homo erectus in Asia. And then, so it's like, it's just everybody, yeah, anybody who runs into any sort of person at all, there's some interbreeding going on. So,
wow.
It's kind of a thing. It's really changed the way we look at the evolutionary origins of species and the speciation in the last 20, 30 years. Where before you had like, the March of Progress diagram of like, an ape slowly becoming a person, which is completely nonsense now. But then you kind of had this like branching, bushy sort of tree of life with branches that might just wander off and not go anywhere and die out. And that held sway. And now the model a lot of people use is called the braided stream, which is basically that branching tree of life with all these branches that might go extinct and all this kind of stuff, but then also allowing for branches to hybridize with each other. And the fact that hybridization and integration of genes from one species or population to another is a much bigger thing than we ever thought it was. And now that we can look at their genomes, we see that. You see it in carpets, you see it in humans, you see it in brown bears and polar bears. If you look at the genome of any polar bear, you're going to see brown bear DNA. And if you look in brown bear DNA, you're going to see polar bear DNA, because there have been multiple occasions where the Earth was slightly warmer than it is even now, and there was no sea ice. And what happens when there's no sea ice? The polar bears are on land, and they're interbreeding with brown bears. And then when the ice returns, they go their separate ways, but it leaves little signatures in their DNA where those events have happened.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's so super interesting. That's kind of, it's a bit off topic. You wanted me to talk about carpet pythons, but this sort of stuff applies to carpet pythons, to people, to everything. It's like, I think that's powerful knowledge. It's not just understanding this snake that I keep in a box. This is understanding how life itself works, the mechanics of nature and how life works and how species work. And I think that is a bigger sort of topic, but a really interesting one.
I want to talk about anything. Anything interesting, and I love that kind of stuff, especially the evolution and yeah, the origin of all this stuff. It's wild, especially like the geckos from New Caledonia are really fascinating to me.
Yeah, but the fun fact, like there's so many cool things. It's like there's the basic sort of hobby level interest of reptiles where you're like, look at this cool thing from this place, this island, that island, whatever. And then just below the surface, there's this whole other world of even more interesting things. And there's how, what, and there's why, isn't there? And like the what is the gecko from New Caledonia. That's what it is. That's the what. But the how and the why are the more interesting questions. Like, how the hell did these geckos get to New Caledonia? Why why is the dominant land predator in these islands a big ass gecko? What the hell? Like that's what's interesting. And the answer is even more interesting because New Caledonia is part of a submerged continent. There's an entire other continent that people don't realize that doesn't get any credit called Zealandia. And it's continental crust. And for a long time, it was well above the ocean, but it has subsided. And now the only two parts of Zealandia, of this continent, that are above water are New Zealand and New Caledonia. They are basically mountains that were at the northern tip and the southern bit of Zealandia, and all the rest of it is underwater now.
Wow.
Which is why there's amazing fishing around New Zealand, because it's all shallow. It's far south. So you get that cold sort of water. The cold water temperatures hold more nutrients. So you get like they're really productive, but then it's not that shallow. It's like cold water, but it's kind of shallow because it's a submerged continent there. So like you get great fishing off of New Zealand. Because it's a submerged continent. So yeah, New Zealand is just a mountain range that's sticking up that was on Zealandia that's still above water, and New Caledonia is the northern little bit, some mountains at the top, and that's it. Which is why, do you know what Delacorte's giant gecko was?
No.
Okay, the largest gecko ever discovered is believed extinct. This is a gecko found in New Zealand, I believe. There's one specimen. The holotype specimen is the only specimen ever found. And they didn't, a couple hundred years ago, they did dumb stuff. They didn't know it was going to be the only one anyone was ever going to find. It was going to be extinct shortly thereafter. So it's stuffed. Like it's literally the bones are gone. And I think a skull's in there and a couple small bones, but it's stuffed. But it's a giant gecko. Like substantially larger than any lychee. A truly ginormous gecko from New Zealand. And then they found another one. They've been presumed extinct for a couple hundred years. They recently, a handful of years ago, they actually got DNA from the one stuffed specimen. And guess what? It came out as the closest relative to the New Caledonian geckos.
Really?
Yeah, and the reason why is because these gecko lineages were already on Zealandia before the rest of it subsided, and they just maintained separate populations. They didn't swim to get there. They didn't raft to get there. They were just already there. The continent went down and they just rode. They're just up in the mountains. And that's where they're relic populations of some things that their ancestors were much more widely spread in the submerged continental crust.
Wow.
Geckos are a really ancient lineage of lizards. They've been around a long time. But that's why they would show a close kinship. It's a sizable different distance between those points. But I think that's the more interesting story. It's like, what?
That is.
Similarly, you see, people, well, why are there boas in Indonesia? Like Candoya genus, all these like true boas. Why are all these boas down in like New Guinea and Indonesia and all this stuff when all of their boas are in the New World? Why are these old world boas here? And the answer to that is that they didn't swim to get there. They didn't raft to get there. They were always there, and the land underneath their feet moved that far. Because all that shit was part of Gondwana, a supercontinent. When Pangaea split up in the late Triassic, causing the end Triassic extinction, you had the breakup of Pangaea. It split north-south into Gondwana in the south and Laurasia in the top. And all those Africa, Australia, all this stuff was part of Gondwana. And there were reptiles, and some of these lineages go back to, their ancestors go back that far. And so these boas rode South America all the way to where it is now. They were just always there. They didn't go anywhere. They stayed where they always were, which is why Candoya are super basal boas. They are a very, very ancient lineage. They just were always, they didn't go anywhere. They've been where they always were. The ground underneath them has moved substantially in those millions of years, though.
Do you keep any boas?
Yeah, not a lot.
What do you keep?
What do I have? I've got some rare Venezuelan locality Corrales Russian burgeri. I've bred annulated tree boas a few times. Currently, I need to get another female. So I do have annulatus. I've got a bunch of hortolanus, of course, because everybody has hortolanus. So I got 3 species of Candoya. I've got 3 species of Corrales. And then in Candoya, what do I have? I've got a group of Halmahera ground boas. I've got a group of Solomon Islands tree boas and a group of Solomon Island ground boas. So I have 3 species of Candoya, 3 species of Corallus. I do have a handful of rosy boas, but those aren't real boas, so those don't count. Technically, people always lump rosy boas and that kind of stuff and sand boas in with boas, but they're not really true boas. They are new and old world Eracine snakes. They are a separate group of snakes that's equal taxonomically to the true boas, but they're not really true boas. They're their own thing. But they maintain a hind legs, hind limbs and a pelvis and all the rest of that stuff. But they get lumped in. There's a lot of weird super basal snakes that aren't really true boas that get lumped in with the boas because they give live birth. So
Interesting.
Like Tropidophids and the freaking Boilerids and the, and that stuff, all that stuff. They're not really true boas. So I don't count those. I got a pair of crawl key boas, but yeah, not a lot of boas.
Any Argentines?
No, that's one of those. I'd like to get some. I don't have anywhere to put them, but it's just such a damn shame that those are so hard to find now. Because again, morph hybrids, they just hybridize them out of existence. And now it's hard to find reliably pure Argentine boas. I have a friend that has a group that I'm waiting for him to produce them again, and I'll probably get a pair just because I feel like I like them.
Which friend is that?
Travis Johnson. You know Travis Johnson? Okay. You know Travis?
Yeah, Living Legless?
Yeah, I've known Travis for a long time.
One of his female Argentines is in this cage right here.
He's one of the few people in the hobby I trust enough to send him stuff on breeding loan. He has a bunch of my snakes. I just send him.
Right on.
I won't have anywhere to put something. I'll have too many holdbacks growing up, and I need the cage space. Like I've sent him probably a dozen adult snakes.
That's awesome.
He's a good dude, though. He's like, you got to be careful who you loan stuff to in this hobby. I mean, even if it would be worse if, even for someone like me that is, probably a little better known than some other people, maybe you would think that would be a deterrent for ripping somebody off on a breeding loan, but it isn't. It's amazing that people still just do that. Yeah. So now I will only send stuff like that to people I trust. And I've known Travis for a long time. And so he's one of those people I can trust.
Yeah, he should be coming on the podcast pretty soon.
Yeah, you send somebody something on a breeding loan and it might breed, it might not breed. Hell, it might even die. That's the thing that can happen. But I know what he tells me is true. Yeah. He's not lying to me. I trust him completely. So good dude.
Yeah, he is a good dude. Do you want to jump into
we're at 1 hour. Are we going to get to the topic at hand?
I know. Real quick, I do want to know what were you doing for work and when did you quit it and what was that experience like?
I've had 3 totally different careers, like completely different. I was basically a sous chef, so I cooked professionally for about a decade. And then after that, I got sick of if you're good at that career, you're stuck working every night and all nights and weekends. And that sucks. And it's a stressful career. So hats off to people that do that. I did it for a long time. I know what's involved. It's a lot of work. And then I had in my younger days, because I was like super poor as a kid, like super poor, like food stamps and government cheese poor. There are a lot of people who don't know what government cheese, what that refers to, but some of us older guys do. And I had friends that were not poor. And so, they'd have whatever they had, whether that was bikes or cars or whatever. And then I wanted those things all my friends had, only I was the poor guy. So being poor teaches you to be pretty resourceful and it teaches you to fend for yourself and do things. I can't afford to buy a car that is not a piece of shit. I have to buy a piece of shit and figure out how to fix it and make it no longer a piece of shit. That sort of stuff. So I had auto body skills and paint skills that I had taught myself to do from those days. So I got a job. My second career was doing body work at a body shop, but not a normal body shop, a commercial body shop that just worked on like semi trucks and ambulances and fire engines and big stuff like RVs, big things, not passenger cars. And since semi trucks the hoods are like $5,000 and they're fiberglass. So you can pay some employee a lot of hours to fix something before you reach a replacement cost for the part. So I learned, and it's a dirty, itchy, gross work. It's difficult. So I got stuck with it. And I got really, really good at it. So I did fiberglass work for a decade. And then I slowly phased myself out. There was to me, it's funny. Maybe it sounds egotistical, but there was a moment I'm working the body shop and I'm talking to this guy, Ray. And Ray was a pretty blue collar dude. He's a good dude. But I'm talking about something that was of interest to me, and it was something science related. And he just like stopped me in mid sentence and looked at me just completely dead faced and said, "Why in the fuck are you working here? What are you doing? Why are you wasting your time here? What are you doing?" And that stuck with me. And it took me a few more years to finally do it. But that started me down the path of like, I want to work for myself. And then years later, as my body shop career started coming to an end and everything, I told them like a couple of years in advance, I'm like, I'm going to just breed snakes for a living. Because I just got to a point where I was making as much money breeding snakes as I was working a job. And I just put all the pieces in place. And I finally, I told people that was my goal. And then when I put in my 2 weeks notice, they asked me where I was going to go work. I'm like, I told you I'm not going to work anywhere. I'm going home. Like, I've been planning this for like 2 years. Like, I timed it so perfectly. My last day at work was December 31st. That was it. So my thought was that I wouldn't have to have a W-2 for the following year. That it would just be perfect. And then I forgot there was a 1 week lag in pay period. So I had one paycheck on like January 6th or 7th. This is like crap. So, but that was, yeah. So my ex-wife went back for maternity leave and I got to be a stay-at-home dad and breed snakes for a living. And there you go.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And here we are almost 18 years later, still just doing this.
That's so crazy. Do you still have any pet snakes, or are they all part of your work now?
They're pretty much all working snakes. I have snakes that it makes no sense to keep financially, for sure. I mean, what do you do with a snake that's almost 20 years old? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I feel like a shitheel if I got rid of it now. Like, I've got some of these things are getting up there. Pythons never go through menopause. They don't become sterile, but they do, their fertility and fecundity drop past a certain point. Once you get north of about 15, 16 years old, you start seeing way less frequent ovulations and like smaller clutch sizes with lower fertility rates. You can still get something sometimes, but they peter out. I mean, I've got a pair of Queensland locality water pythons, and I just realized they're 19 years old. I had a clutch from them, a good clutch last year, but at 19 years old, it's like we're getting up there. I've got some 20-year-old olive python. I have a lot of snakes that are in the 10 to 20-year range. I would say the average age of breeder animals at my house is probably 12 years old, 13 years old. I have a lot of old snakes.
Nice. So as they get older, they turn into more of a pet?
No, I don't know. I mean, they do die. I mean, and the reality is this is, gets into things that like are unpleasant to talk about. So most people just refuse to talk about. People in the hobby are very, and I think I blame social media for everything. So I'll blame social media for this. And the people are so obsessed with how things come across and look on social media. And they create this idealized alternate reality universe where everyone else, like most reptile people, whenever they're talking about what they're doing with their projects, it's always just nothing but rainbows and sunshine and unicorns and everything's fucking great all the time. And if you've kept snakes or reptiles for any amount of time, that's bullshit. If you breed animals with any frequency at all, you will see terrible things. You will see birth defects, stillborns, animals get sick, they die. Sometimes you have to euthanize things. There's a definite unpleasant side to working with living animals because let's face it, anything that is alive eventually gets unalive, doesn't it? It's inevitable. And sometimes that is not necessarily at a ripe old age. Things go wrong. If you had 100 people in a room, they're not all going to live to be 90, are they? Some of them are going to die young. You're obviously a younger man than me, but I'm betting that even at your tender young age, you've probably known people who are your contemporaries that are no longer alive, haven't you?
Yeah.
You don't know, and shit happens, and that's just the thing you got to learn to deal with in this hobby. So, yeah, and where I was going with that is that if you have whatever, it's easier with a female. The analogy works better. If you have said female python and you start breeding her when she's 4 years old, and you breed that snake every year, you've bred pythons, right? Or boas?
No.
You've
Nope.
not hatched a clutch of bred pythons?
Nope.
Okay, you'll see it, and then you're like, holy shit, you'll call me. It's like, I can't believe you were so totally right. The amount of like sacrifice that a female python or boa gives to produce a clutch or a litter of offspring is ridiculous. The amount of body condition that they lose is astounding. They will lay a clutch of eggs and usually look like they're about to fucking die. Like I've seen them lose like 50% of their total mass. They're like emaciated. They look like they're gonna crash and die. So much of their body condition, their muscle mass, all their body fat, everything goes into that clutch of eggs. And then they have to rebuild slowly, and it takes a year or two to build up that body condition. But that process of like getting to death's door and doing that over and over and over again, the more times you do that, you start to shorten the life expectancy of that snake. And that's the reality of it. And we breed these things a lot. We breed them more than their wild counterparts. Are never, I've had pythons lay 10, 12 clutches of eggs in their life. I had a Simpsons python laid every single year for 12 consecutive years, back to back. Wow. I finally retired her and gave her to a friend as a pet. She was still fine. She probably would have kept going. But no wild Simpsons python is laying a clutch a year for 12 years. And so you can shorten their life expectancy by, burning the candle at both ends. It doesn't burn as long, does it? But we like to tell ourselves that that's not true, but it is. So sometimes you have adults that, I think would have lived longer if you didn't breed them so damn much. But most people do, and I've certainly been guilty of that myself. So,
do you give them more time off now, or do you still?
It depends. There's another problem I think people have in the hobby, and I speak primarily in the python side of it because that's my thing. But it clearly extends to other areas as well. Is that there's no area of this hobby for which there is a one-size-fits-all answer or explanation. Not in temperature, not in prey size, longevity, adults. There's nothing. You can't tell me a single metric by which there's a one-size-fits-all answer that works. Everything's different. Different species have higher or lower metabolic rates. Things like a Candoya boa has an incredibly low metabolic rate. They don't eat much. They grow super slow. They live a ridiculously long time because they have a low metabolic rate. Other things at the other end of that spectrum are, eat a lot more, grow faster, and they don't live as long. It's like there's a metabolic cost associated with that. So you can't really make hard and fast rules about any of this stuff. How much do you feed it? It depends on what it is and which individual it is. Even with animals, and I've done this with snakes from the same clutch that were like very closely related parents even, and then you have two you hold back. You can feed them the exact same thing. They're sitting in tubs right next to each other. You feed them exactly the same thing on exactly the same day. They have exactly the same amount. Their feeding schedules are identical, yet one grows faster than the other. Why? Because one's has a bit more digestive efficiency or a bit small difference in resting metabolic rate and stuff. So there are these differences. It's not, well, do you have a brother?
I have two kids and I do have a brother. Yeah.
Is your brother exactly the same height as you?
Hell no.
Probably not. It's like, no,
yeah,
the same basic genes, but no, there's differences. So I don't keep feed schedules. I think a feeding schedule is a terrible idea, and no one should do that. Yeah. I keep track of feedings for babies that I have not sold yet, because I need to know when they ate last. You need to, for that, and because you want to establish a good pattern of feeding before they go off to their new homes. But my adults, I don't know when I fed them last. I feed them when they need to eat. You get to know your individual animals, and you kind of tell by looking at them, oh, I haven't fed you in a while. Usually I haven't even remember the last time I fed you. It's like most of my male carpet pythons, because that's what I'm best known for, like they'll be lucky if they get 10 meals a year in an entire year. If I feed them 10 times, they've had an exceptionally good year. Sometimes it's not even that. And they're fine. And a lot of them are 15, 16 years old, doing great. We don't, if you feed on a schedule, this is like going to be an obese snake. It's like, well, it's Tuesday. I got to feed everybody. It's like, no, you don't. It's like, what are you doing? Like, it's like this, especially with an animal that's expending 0 calories moving around or doing much. You don't. You should feed as needed.
Now,
smaller prey. You don't need otherwise you end up with these giant obese snakes. And the hobby, the greed factor in the hobby, obviously we all see it. We all know what we're talking about when that comes up. It's like, I've got to get this snake up to breeding size right away so I can make morph X, Y, and Z before the market comes down. It becomes like, at that point, it becomes like a commodity or something and not a living. We tend to treat, especially morph animals that are deemed investments, is a shitty way to treat an animal, because then you're treating it like an investment, not like a living thing. And you're making decisions that are in your financial interests, which oftentimes conflict with the long-term health interests of that animal. And that's something I think the hobby do better to get away from. It's like, you know what? What happens if you feed it a little bit less? Oh, it'll take another year to mature. Who fucking cares? Just wait another year, and this thing it'll be fine. Oh no, I got to get this so I can make my, whatever this year. It's like that sort of mindset is what, well, ask yourself, you look at, like, the worst is the ball python thing, where it's all just turn them and burn them. And if you get your 3-gene female, and the minute you got a 4-gene female, that 3-gene female is worthless and it's like $100. Just get rid of it. And they don't see that these animals don't live that long because they don't have them that long. They breed them a couple of times and they become obsolete and they die on the 5 owners later, the thing drops dead. So they're not aware of it. It's like, if you think of how many, well, on any given day on Morph Market, there's over 40,000 ball pythons for sale. 40,000 every day. And it's been that way for a long time. At that rate, and ball pythons, we know, are the longest lived snake known, and we know that they can live about 50 years, at least 50 years. With a 50-year lifespan or longer, the entire earth should be paved over with ball pythons by now. The fact that they're not, where did they go? If there's 40,000 a day listed, let's just say there's 100,000 ball pythons produced a year. And then last year it was 100,000. The year before that, there would be a ball python. There'd be 10 ball pythons in every house, just with the stuff that's been produced since 2000 when it really took off. Where are they all? They all should still be alive, because 2000 was only 24 years ago, and we know they can live twice that long. If these animals were living a normal life expectancy, long, happy, healthy lives, we should literally be tripping over them in our yards now. Where did they go? The answer is clear. They're fucking dead. Why are they dead? Because you fed them way too much, way too fast, pushed them way too hard, tried to get way too many clutches out of them when they're way too young, and they just crapped out and died prematurely. Yeah, you should be able to, the earth should be completely covered in a 6-inch deep layer of ball pythons by now for how many have been produced. The only reason it's not is because they're not living the lives that they should. And the only reason they're not is because people look at it like a commodity, and they're just, and I think that when the hobby gets to that point, we should collectively need to reassess what we're doing. I think we've lost the plot entirely. I mean, are you even an animal lover at that point? Everybody says they are, but they're taking actions that are really not really in the animal's self-interest.
That's really depressing.
It's true, though. The more you think about it, it's starting to sink in now, isn't it? Where are all these ball pythons? Yeah. Where are they at? I mean, sure, there's going to be a percentage that dies in any given year because the animals don't, things go wrong. Sure. I mean, the number one killer of snakes in my collection is cancer. If a snake dies at my house, it most likely reason is it got a tumor or some sort of malignant growth or something, because they get all that stuff too. I mean, I've had snakes that have kidney failure. You name it, I've seen it. So there is attrition. They don't all live a long life, but damn, I mean, ball pythons are almost indestructible. The fact that they are not literally everywhere, I mean everywhere. Where did they all go? Yeah, because they're not living to be 50 years old, are they?
Do you keep any ball pythons? Funny
you should ask that. I try not to. I did. Like I bred a lot of ball pythons for a while, but then I started to really have a disdain for the sort of culture of ball python breeding, which is just turn them and burn them. And the only thing that matters is how many broken, non-functioning genes we can cram into one snake. It's like a giant race to make the most genetically unfit animal you can. And that's like, what did you think was going to happen when you keep stacking up broken genes that don't work right into one animal? It's like, at some point, it's not cool for the snake anymore, probably. And then the mindset, nobody values what they do. It's a perpetual race to the bottom. It's only cool for a few years, and then it's old news, and they're on to the next thing. And it's just like, even if these guys, if they have like a goal of a particular, let's just say a 4-gene combo, and then the second they hit the 4-gene combo, and regardless of how long it took them, the very minute they hatch it, are they happy? No, because there's no happiness ever. There's no satisfaction ever, because the second you made the 4-gene thing you've been trying to make for 6 years, well, now you got to figure out what else you got to add to it, because you got to make it a 5-gene thing, because you can't just be happy with anything. It's just this never-ending cycle of never being satisfied with anything, ever.
Yeah.
And I don't. Also, I breed morph stuff in a lot of species, but I have wild types of all those species. And if I had to pick between wild types and mutants, it would only take me a millisecond to say wild types. I mean, I breed morph stuff, but it's like in addition to, it's not better than, it's not more important than, it is not, I don't care about that more. I care about it less, if I'm being honest. I may hatch the first ever super hypoxanthic coastal carpet, at least, in the United States anyway. I'll probably hatch that this year, and that'll be cool. But I'm not that. It's cool. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I'm more happy that I'll hatch another clutch of gelatin carpets because that's really neat.
Yeah.
If we look at snakes and we only value them for the mutations that they carry, then do you even like the snakes? No. Most ball python people, and they're the easiest ones to pick on, but I'll say the retic people. They don't even like retics. And ball python people don't like ball pythons. They like mutants. They like morphs. Ask how many ball python breeders how many normal ball pythons they produce. And the answer is almost always 0 or a tiny number on accident. They do everything they can to not make what the snake is supposed to fucking look like. It's like, do you like ball pythons if you have complete disdain for a natural looking ball python? If you think you need to you accidentally hatch a normal ball python and your solution to the problem of the normal is to put it in the freezer and kill it the minute it comes out of the egg because it's not even worthy of putting a single mouse into, you just sentence it to death straight away for the crime of being normally pigmented. At that point, you have lost you've lost your mind. You need to reevaluate your choices. I really think that. That's good God. I mean, what's wrong with a normal ball python? Why is it no one can appreciate? It's a beautiful snake. If you look at a normal ball python, it's a cool looking snake. It's not broken. It doesn't need fixing.
Yeah.
But they looked at it with complete disdain. Oh my God, I hatched normals. Oh, the humanity of it, right? It's I don't know. I think people need to reassess what they're doing in a lot of cases. It's you can be super into morphs and doing that kind of stuff, but you should still have an appreciation for the species itself. If you have no appreciation for the species itself, then all you care about is morphs, then it's kind of, I don't understand it. I don't think that's a healthy mindset.
It's really dark.
It's true though. And if no one will talk about the things that are dark, then, I mean, this is why these things go on, because nobody says this is bullshit. What are we doing? What are we doing? The fact that so many bigger ball python breeders just freaking quietly euthanize normals and low percentage possible hets and send them to people as cobra feeders. When was the last time we saw a picture of a cobra eating anything but a ball python?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun fact, those weren't messed up ball pythons. They were perfectly fine. They just were deemed as not valuable enough to keep alive anymore. So they become feeders. It's I question that. Why are we doing that? Why are you making snakes that you need to kill? Why would you make something that you're going to need to, if you need to kill a certain percentage of the animals you produce, what the hell are you doing? Why are you doing that? I don't.
That is so depressing.
I mean, if you breed a lot of snakes every year, and this year won't be any different, I will have to euthanize a few baby snakes that are born with deformities or what have you. That's an unnecessary and unpleasant job. But I can tell you right now, I'm a total sucker. The amount of effort I will put into trying to get some banged up, deformed snake to eat so I can give it away for free is ridiculous. Right now, I had a bunch last year. I had 5 scratch and dent snakes. I got a beautiful zebra with a kink in its neck. You wouldn't even think it could eat. It could totally eat fine. I assist fed the kink neck snake for 6 months before it finally ate on its own. It eats great now. It's beautiful. It's almost the point now where I could officially just give it away to somebody for free. But I'm so soft, I couldn't even bring myself to put that thing down, because if it can live a normal life, meaning it can eat, shed, and shit without problem, I won't kill it. I'll struggle to get it feeding and give it away. I got a zebra born with 1 eye. It's fine. But it took forever to get feeding, but I got it feeding, and I'll just give that one to somebody as a pet or whatever. But I don't know. I think most of the time, if you have to euthanize something, that might well be necessary, but I think all too often it's done out of convenience. People do it because they don't want to be bothered with it. And I'm too soft. I can't bring myself to do that. So I'll struggle for months or even a year or whatever it takes. Get the damn thing going. Give it to somebody as a pet.
Well, that's cool. Is that so with the zebras? Is that, I mean, you just brought up two examples that happen to be zebra. Do the zebras happen to suffer from more birth
No,
defects? Okay.
no, I had like 5 clutches of jungles last year. So it worked out that to be that way. What else? I had a poplin carpet with a mildly cleft lip. I had a black-headed python with a cleft lip, which are fine. Minor blemish. I had an inland carpet with a stumpy tail, meaning like the last like 2 millimeters of tail just never formed. It just rounded off. It's like it should have like 2 more millimeters of tail. That stuff's not hereditary. I just kept that one. I'm not going to put that snake down. I'm not going to give it away either. It's fine. I don't care. It's not like there's a missing tail tip gene or something. People obsess with, oh, you shouldn't breed that. You shouldn't breed that. It's like there's a difference between genetic defects that are hereditary and developmental problems. A developmental thing is not really hereditary, is it? There's no one-eyed gene. You can breed all the one-eyed snakes you want. You're not going to make more one-eyed snakes. There's no one-eyed gene. That is an unfortunate thing that's screwed up during the process with that individual. It's not, strictly speaking, it's not hereditary.
All right.
I don't have a bunch of breeder one-eyed snakes or anything, but it's not, you know.
It's just a funny visual.
No, but it's like it's not, I'm not going to euthanize the snake because it was born with one eye. It's kind of freaky looking when you see it because carpets have an ocular stripe that starts behind the eye, goes through the eye, comes out on the other side of the nose, and goes all the way through the nostril.
Yeah.
But if they're born with one eye missing, there's no eye orbit. It's just smooth. That whole side is just completely smooth. It's like you just airbrushed and deleted the eye was never there.
Wow.
So the stripe that was there just goes all the way through the area where the eye should have been. It just goes uninterrupted right through it.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, they can be fine. There was many years ago, there was an adult black-headed python found in Australia that had no eyes.
What?
A full-grown adult black-headed python. Full-grown adult in the wild. It made it to make an adult to adult size being blind.
Wow.
I was in Fog Dam, Northern Territory, catching some water pythons, and I found an adult male that had, I don't know, I assume it was a male. I don't know why. I was getting male vibes from the snake. I assume it was a male. I don't know why. One eye, and the other eye was just smooth scales. The eye was never there. Full-grown ass adult snake. Doing just fine, living his best life in a crocodile-infested billabong. Doing just fine. One eye missing. No doubt.
So you got a heart of gold towards the animals that you reproduce. I've heard you say on some podcasts.
Or have no business sense. It's one of those two.
I've heard you say on some podcasts that you don't want to put human emotions into the snakes. Why is that?
Because they're not humans. I think there's a trend in the hobby that I think is detrimental, and you see it manifest itself in all sorts of ways and with all sorts of situations. And that is this tend to anthropomorphize your snakes. And they think, well, I wouldn't want to be crammed in a tiny little tub, so the snake doesn't want to be crammed in a tiny little tub either. It's like the snake is not a person. The snake is not cognitively capable of thinking like a person. That whole frontal bit of your brain that processes things like whether you're happy or sad or bored, they don't even have any of that. Things are either adequate or inadequate. They are stressed or they are not stressed. And that's really about it. They don't have happy. They don't have bored. They're not that kind of animal. Your dog might get bored. I know, you might need some enrichment in the enclosure of an African elephant because it's really a pretty smart animal and it's going to get bored and get a little stir crazy. You need to do those things. There's a reason why when you go to the zoo and they go to the polar bear tank, there's a big beach ball for them to smack around and something to do. That's a different animal. A snake does not get bored. It's not cognitively capable of boredom. There was a study done that was part of a doctoral thesis, and they compared the behavioral ecology of two desert pythons and two monsoon belt pythons, and in Australia. And they used Brettles pythons and Simpson's pythons for the desert species, a desert carpet and a desert antaresia, and then they used children's pythons and Darwin carpets for the tropical analogs to see the differences in their behavioral ecology and how they use their environment and how they acted. And it was interesting. But the funniest thing in the whole thing to me was you're radio tracking snakes, and one of them, a Bredl's python, just got up in the attic of somebody's attic in Alice Springs for the winter. And it basically just nestled down in the insulation and sat there motionless for 6 months. Just freaking sat there. Could have gone, done anything it wanted. Could have amused itself if it needed to. It just sat like a fucking statue. Didn't move a muscle. Didn't do anything. And then it got warm enough. It's like, all right, time to leave. Crawled off and was fine. Wow. Sitting utterly motionless required almost no calorie expenditures. It kept its calorie budget to almost nothing. So it lost very little body condition, even that for a long period of time. Didn't need to do anything. Just sat there and just vegetated for half a year and then left.
Wow.
Snake did not get bored in that time. I think people that are obsessed with that sort of stuff, they are very well-meaning. They want to do the best they can for their animals, and I think that's admirable. But imbuing them with human emotions or perceived human emotions, I don't think that does anybody any favors, because it leads to things like, demonizing rack systems are evil and horrible. It's like, yeah, hatch out 50 snakes and tell them you're going to put them all in 4-foot cages and tell me how that goes. So, fun fact, some pythons do better in a rack than they do in a cage. Some of these high-strung things, some things, depending on their requirements, will do better. Why do you think ball pythons do so great in rack systems? Because they spend most of their lives, especially females, underground in burrows and shit. They're in a small little confined space. But they're not claustrophobic. They don't. What happens when you put a hide box in your snake's enclosure, even if it's a tub? It spends almost all its time wedged in there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Once in a while they'll be out, but mostly they're going to wedge into the smallest crack they can. So I think that, overly anthropomorphizing leads people to divide the community up into weird, it's a lot of virtue signaling like everything else in life, where it's like, well, we're doing this thing, it's better, and you guys are a bunch of reprobates because you're using outdated techniques and all this kind of just pontificating about something they don't understand. And I think that's detrimental to the hobby. You can do your, if you want to put your snake in a big cage and sprinkle some springtails and isopods in there and think that it's magical fairy dust, it's going to, everything's going to be awesome. You can do that. It's not going to work out super good, but it's like, you could do that. Isopods and springtails are great if you got geckos or something for eating little tiny gecko poos, but it ain't going to do nothing if you got a Burmese python. There's not you need those giant marine isopods are like that big. Ain't no isopod cleaning up after your retic.
Yeah.
Pythons make just too big a dumps, frankly. But I encourage people to do the best they can, provide the most they can. It's sometimes but it goes so far that I'm constantly, almost every week, I have to decline to sell snakes to people because I get this message like, oh, I'm really interested in this. They say two things. I've done all my research. Huge red flag. Just, whoa, what? You've done all your research? Invariably, I Googled some stuff on the internet and it's all wrong. That's what that really means usually. And then I've already got its cage already. I'm like, oh, good Lord. I've already got its cage already because it's always something that's wildly inappropriate. It's usually something that's, it's like a 4-foot wide by 2 foot deep by 4 foot tall bioactive. And they want to buy like a 19-gram snake, a baby inland carpet that weighs 19 or 20 grams. And they think they're going to put it in this cage. And it's like, and I have to refuse to sell it to them. I was like, you're going to kill that snake. And then you're going to blame me because you're never going to own up that you screwed up. It'll have to be that I sold you a bad snake. It's never going to work out. And they always think, but the snake knows what it needs. Like, it fucking doesn't. I can assure you they don't. I can absolutely assure you they don't. It's like snakes don't understand certain concepts like too cold. They don't really understand too cold. They understand too hot. But where they live in the wild, it doesn't get too cold. So if you put a snake, and the snake's number one job, regardless of species, whether it's a carpet python or anything else, the number one job is don't get eaten. The number 2 job is don't get eaten. The number 3 and 4 jobs are also don't get eaten. You got to get all the way down to 5 or 6 before you think about thermoregulation and food. It's don't get eaten. Because if you get eaten, none of that other stuff matters. So they will prioritize security over every single other consideration. basically what I'm saying is if you had a big cage, let's say you had a cage the size of a room, the biggest, best cage that ever existed. And let's just say that you actually have the temperatures magically perfect, meaning that even if the ceiling and the floor, everything was perfectly the exact perfect temperature, which is impossible. But let's just say, since it's a fantasy, that you actually achieved the impossible and everything was perfect. And it's a huge cage. And then in the very bottom corner, you got a big ass block of ice and you put a hide box on a block of ice. You will have a frozen python 100% of the time. They will just sit there like freeze to death. They don't understand the concept of too cold, but their drive to feel secure is so strong, they will literally freeze themselves to death sitting on a block of ice when all the rest of this cage is perfect. And it's way worse with babies. They lose temperature, they gain temperature, lose temperature really fast, and they are at the bottom of the food chain. A carpet python they go from a very low trophic level, they're near the bottom of the ecosystem, everybody eats them, to by the time they're an adult, they're kind of the apex predator, and they have almost nothing to fear. Virtually nothing eats adult carpet pythons. Almost nothing. So they don't have anything to fear. So as they get older, they will make progressively better decisions about basking openly and how they're operating. But as babies, they fucking won't. I mean, if you want to put a 2-year-old snake in a 4-foot tall cage, it might do all right. But a baby is not. It's going to go find the coldest, darkest crevice in the corner and sit there until flagellates build up in its GI tract and quits eating and crashes. So,
jeez,
smaller is better when they're young. When they get older, you can give them a lot more latitude. I'd explain this to a customer. I was really hesitant to sell her the snake, but she seemed like she was listening to me. And I had said it like this. And I asked her if she had kids, and she did, because most of us, she's my age, hard to get to 50 and not have kids. But I said, okay, put this in human perspective. When you brought your newborn home from the hospital, did you give it free reign of the house? Fuck no. That's crazy. Why? Because babies don't make good decisions. You don't give them what do you do? What do you do with your newborn baby? You put it in like a bassinet. What's a bassinet? It's a tiny human cage, isn't it? It's a tiny ass little cage for a human baby. And what do you do when your kid's like 6 months old? You've got kids. What did you do when they're a little bit older? You gave them a crib, didn't you? What's a crib? A slightly bigger cage for a baby or a toddler. Why? Because toddlers don't make good decisions. You can't give a toddler the run of the damn house. Are you kidding me? No. It's like, and then what happens when your kids got to outgrow the crib? What, you have the baby gate thing? So now you can cordon them off and keep them in one room where you've kind of baby-proofed it. Remember that, the baby gate thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What did you do? You turned your living room into you guessed it, a slightly bigger cage, incrementally bigger cages. And then when they're maybe, a little bit older, then you can finally give them the run of the house and they've learned to make better decisions. And I'm telling you that a human infant has a brain that weighs a hell of a lot, weighs 10 times more than the snake's entire body. That hatching carpet python has a brain that weighs a tiny fraction of a gram. A tiny fraction of a gram. And if you think of all the gray matter of like a newborn human, you telling me that the newborn human is less intelligent than the smart snake with a brain so small you need a magnifying glass to even fucking see it is smarter than a human infant? We don't let humans do that. And they're way smarter. We keep them in little cages. Eventually, they get their free reign of things when they're ready and they've learned to make better decisions.
That's a perfect analogy.
That's why you put baby snakes in little tubs. What?
I said it's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, that's why you keep your babies in little tubs. Insultingly small tubs initially with a hide so they feel very secure and they're not stressed. And then they maybe will start eating. And then when they get a pretty good food response, you can move them to something a little bit bigger, give them a little more running room, and you gradually, by the time I have an animal, let's say a carpet python that gets to be an adult and it gets a slot in the adult room where my breeders are, it's had like 4 or 5 different incremental size increases. It starts out small and then it goes to the next thing and then it goes to the next thing. And then, you don't just, and and I can get away with a lot because I have like the whole room just stays 80 degrees. So I don't have a temperature problem. But most of these people that do this, they're putting it in an unheated room. So the room's like 65, 70 degrees. It's like, well, that's way too cold at the low end if the snake's got food in its belly. Yeah. For a python anyway. It's I don't know. I think these is detrimental or potentially.
Are you ready for a jungle carpet care guide lightning round. We'll make it fast.
That'll only take like 10 seconds. They're easy. All right.
All right.
Fire away. Ask me questions.
All right. All right. Are they a display animal or a pet?
I don't know. I think of my dogs as pets. I think of all snakes as display animals. If you're defining pet as something you can get out and handle it, jungle carpets are kind of iffy. They are easily the most aggressive of all the carpets, but they're not all jerks, but a lot of them are. So, I've got probably 20 adult jungle carpets, and most of them are not bad as far as their temperament goes, but most of my carpets that have bad attitudes are also jungle carpets. So the total number of carpets I have that are aggressive, most of them are jungles, but that's, 40% of them are really shady, I guess is what I'm saying. So they're not going to make the best pet for a carpet, but on an individual basis, and if you're willing to put some time into work with them, most of them can be fairly handleable. But even if you try, you'll still find a small percentage that are just not going to get with the program.
All right. Substrate or paper?
Yes. It's a philosophy thing. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
I've got them. If you're looking at my snake buildings, in the snake building in my snake rooms now, you would find some on paper, some on cocoa husks, some on cypress mulch, some on aspen. It just depends. Sometimes it's what I have on hand. Sometimes it makes very little difference. If you lived in an extremely dry area, you might want to go with like a more substrate that holds humidity better. But I live in a pretty dry area and I don't bother half the time. That doesn't really matter.
And they still have good sheds?
Yeah, it's rare to have a bad shed. Very rare to have a bad shed. And I live in a pretty arid area. So I don't even have a thing. I don't have a misting bottle in my snake rooms in any of them. I can't even remember the last time I misted a snake. Okay. It's been probably 15, 20 years. And I live in a borderline desert, so that's not really a concern. So paper has one advantage. It's less aesthetically pleasing, but it keeps you honest. Like if you've got some aspen or some particulate substrate and your snake pisses on it, you can kind of fool yourself into thinking it's not that gross, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can kind of scoop it out a little bit locally and then just add another handful, freshen it up a little bit. But there's always the tendency to let that go too long. And it's like, well, this is pretty skanky. This all needs to be replaced. And probably should have been a long time ago. Paper, it's easy to change, but it keeps you honest. You can't just ignore that something pissed on the paper. It's right in front of you. It didn't seep down to the bottom where you maybe could tell yourself you didn't see it. You see it. It forces you to keep it clean. All my babies, I keep on white unprinted paper towels for that reason. I keep an eye on things and stuff, make sure everything's, because you'll see little signs in the urates. If you see like bright green, you see potential health problems, babies that aren't processing food right or whatever. And when you're feeding frozen, that might be damp or whatever, if they're mashing a frozen or because they're smushing it into the substrate while they're trying to eat it and get it down, it's like you don't want little bits of aspen or whatever sticking to the fuzzy mouse or whatever. Yeah. An adult carpet, if it eats a little bit of aspen, it's going to be of no consequence. But a baby that weighs 22 grams that eats a piece of aspen might be a problem. So I keep them on paper towel for that purpose. And it keeps me honest. I'm just like, they're all get a complete substrate change every week when I go in and clean them. Regardless, I'm just going through like a robot, changing everything. And same with the water bowls, disposable water bowls. So.
All right. Ambient or gradient? What do you prefer?
What do you mean? Like the ball python thing where you just keep the whole room one temperature and that's it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bullshit. Don't do that. That's a terrible idea. I'll just say it. Like that works really well with exactly one thing, ball pythons. What people who do that fail to realize is that ball pythons are the exception to the rule. They are seasonal when they're in the wild, but because we basically fully domesticated them to such an extent that their reproductive parameters and the stimulus they need to reproduce successfully has been utterly and completely removed. You look at how unnatural it is, like males breeding at 6 months old to females that are 18 months old in an 80-degree room with any month of the year with no defined breeding season and no temperature gradient, nothing. They just do it. It's because they're domesticated. They're the only thing that's like that. The amount of stimulus, environmental stimulus to elicit a fertile mating varies by species. And I know there'll be people like thinking like, well, I bred such and such a thing and I just do ambient heat. It's like, yeah, maybe, probably. But, it's the old expression of a broken clock is right twice a day. You can, if you do that, you can occasionally produce babies from a whole bunch of things, but you will not produce consistent year in, year out awesome results. You will get half-ass results half of the time. If you're a hobbyist and you don't really care, and if they breed, they breed. If they don't, they don't. It doesn't really matter to you. Fire away. That's cool. If you want consistent, reliable results with a high degree of certainty and a high degree of success, then you got to do something. Think about it this way. As you go through life, you've probably noticed this to be true. The reward is always proportional to the effort and or risk you put into something. When in your life have you ever found that doing absolutely fucking nothing was the easiest, that doing the easiest, simplest thing, i.e. nothing, produced the best results? Basically never, right? It's like the harder you work at something, the better the outcome is. And if you put no work into something, imagine how shitty your outcome is going to be. Probably not that great. Anybody tells you that the road to success is basically doing absolutely nothing, you should not listen to that person. You will get more out of things the more work you put into anything, and that is a universal truth about life. The more you put in, the more you get out. You don't have to do a lot, but most of these species need some sort of environmental stimulus to kick off reproduction. That can be a food cycle, that can be a temperature cycle.
Okay.
If you keep them all at a flat 80 degrees, you're compromising their ability to digest, though. What you'll find, like I keep everything at 80 to 82 ambient air temperature for most of the year. There are a few exceptions. But they have a basking spot of 88 to 90 degrees during the day for most of the year. It turns off at night. And what you want is you don't want to have a basking spot that is so big that it overheats the rest of the enclosure, whatever type of enclosure that is. You want it to be small and isolated. If they seek it out, they can use it, but it's not gonna discharge too much extra heat into the environment. It's important, but what you'll find is that they want to be, most pythons, the overwhelming majority, want to be 80 to 82 degrees 98% of their lives. They generally will never bask for no reason. If you feed them a big meal, they'll go sit on the heat or under the heat, wherever you're providing it. They'll go bask for a time in the initial stages after eating to help start the process of digestion, speed up their metabolism, help them break down this big meal that they ate. And within a couple of days, they're off the heat. Then they're right back to the 80, 82 because that's where they want to be. But it's important to provide that. If you feed them a giant meal and it's 80 degrees, you run the risk that that meal is going to break down and start to decompose in their gut faster than they can actually process it, and then they regurgitate it. If you're going to do the ambient thing, you kind of are forced to feed smaller meals, or you'd be very wise to do that. Again, since ball python people only feed small meals these days, it works for them. It is not going to work very well for a lot of other things. It's not going to work reliably well anyway. So
what if you're keeping it like a 84 ambient? Same thing?
I think no, I would never recommend that. You look at all these pythons, and I've kept basically every python that you can possibly keep at this point, and they generally, almost all of them want to be around 80, 82 degrees, not more than that. You look at like where they're going to sit, where they're going to behave, and that's the temperature they want to be metabolically. There will be outliers, things like diamond pythons, Boelen's pythons. There are always outliers, but too high of an ambient temperature like that, it's you cause stress in some things, and that's not good.
Okay.
Because the goal obviously with people who do that, it was like, well, if they want to bask at 90 and the rest of the time they want to be 80, if I just split the difference at 85 all the time, it's like, it's not that you're forcibly, their metabolism is temperature regulated. Okay. So everything, all of their metabolic processes, the rate at which their cells are dividing, literally the rate at which their bodies are aging is temperature dependent. So if the animal wants to be 80 degrees all the time on average, and you're making it be 84, you are forcibly speeding its metabolism up. You're forcibly shifting it up into a higher gear metabolically, and that burns things out faster. You're basically forcing it to age prematurely. This is basically what diamond python syndrome is. People keeping diamond pythons that are basically like a they're just geared metabolically much lower because they live in a cold climate. And when you keep them warm, like everything else, you're forcing them into a high gear. So imagine if you were in a, if you're on a mountain bike and you're in a super high gear and you're just pedaling your ass off all the time and you're not supposed to be, it's like eventually your shit breaks down, doesn't it? Because you're not supposed to be pedaling that fast all the time. You're supposed to be in a lower gear. And it causes them to basically age prematurely by forcing their metabolism up.
Okay.
So don't do that. That's I don't. Yeah. So no, I'm not a proponent of the ambient anything.
Okay.
But I provided all my snake rooms have an ambient air temperature that is provided by some external heat source. The room is kept at that temperature, but I also have a basking spot in addition to that is on for 8 hours a day and will mostly get ignored for a lot of times. But you feed them and they'll immediately go sit on, they'll go feed them. And then you'll go in there an hour later and they'll be using that heat. And usually by the next day, they're not using anymore. But it jump starts that process. And it's important for that reason. Obviously, gravid females need to have access to higher temperature ranges.
So for just a regular Joe that's getting a jungle carpet from you, if they're keeping at 78 to 80 with 88 to 90 hotspot, is that acceptable?
Yeah, usually. I always tell people like 80 to 82. And then they'll call me up like, I don't know what the problem is. I'm like, the snake won't eat. I'm doing everything right. It's like, I'm doing everything's perfect. Its environment's perfect. It's like, it's 75 on the cool side and 90 on the warm side, and I handle it every day. I'm doing everything perfect. Like, what? I didn't tell you 75. I said 80 to 82, which means 80 to 82. It doesn't mean 75 is not 80 to 82. It's like, make it these temperatures and quit freaking handling it. It's like, if your snake's not eating, stop touching it. Like, why are you touching it? It's like, you know how stressful it is? A baby carpet, it has a brain that is about half. If you took you know how small a lentil is?
Yeah.
If you cut a lentil in half lengthwise, that's about the brain size of that snake. Half of a lentil, like a sliver of lentil. That's how small its brain is. And then you think the snake's eating great. It lives at Nick's house, and I pack it up. I ship it to the other side of the country. That's a lot of stress, isn't it? Then it gets set up, put in some crazy cage. It's way bigger than what it's used to. Maybe it's even better. I don't know. And then every damn day, these giant hands from the sky reach down. They don't know it's not a predator that's going to eat them. They don't know they live in boxes. For all they know, it's a predator. And this giant hand keeps reaching in and fucking with them every day and playing with them like it's a toy. And then you wonder why it doesn't eat. It's like, leave it alone. I tell everybody the same thing. Don't even touch that snake. Should not even know that you exist until it has eaten at least 3 times. Till it is used to the new surroundings. It knows where it wants to hang out. It knows where it figures out where it wants to be. It's eaten a few times. It's shit. It's done all of its business. And then you start handling it after it's settled in. Don't add that stress on top of.
All right. Now, night drops. Do you recommend them? You said you have your hotspot turn off at night. So yeah, do you recommend
I don't provide a night drop during the most of the year. For my adults or my babies, I've not found a reason to do it. I've not found an advantage to doing it. That said, a small night drop is not going to be a problem. If your ambient air temperature in the summertime was 80 degrees and they had like an 88-degree basking spot, and then at night it dropped to like 76 or 77, it's not going to cause a problem. It will be totally fine. Okay. I've not found any really compelling reason to do that. But it's no harm, no foul. It won't cause a problem.
Okay.
The only potential problem I could see is that with a lot of these things, an increased differential between daytime and nighttime temperature is a primary driver of follicular development and reproduction. If they are used to just always having a night drop of 76, then when you drop it to 70 at night, it's only 6 degrees colder. It's not going to be as pronounced of a difference. And so I don't even think that the night drop is I don't think it's a magic number of degrees you need to hit for magical things to happen and reproduction to occur. I think that they notice that something is different, that the environment, the climate has changed. And so if you were at 76, you might need to go a little bit lower. If it only drops a few more degrees, like, will they even notice? So that might that might jam you up a little, but it wouldn't cause any health problems.
Do you have a target humidity, or do you not concern yourself with it?
I don't, and I encourage other people to not be concerned with it either. People, I mean, the amount of stuff in the hobby that people find to stress themselves out about, it's crazy to me. I sent a snake out a couple weeks ago. I get an email like, "Oh, do you have its shed records?" I gave it all its feeding records. It's like, I don't see, you don't write down its sheds. I'm like, no, why would I do that? What is the point? I used to do that. And after like 15 or 18 years of writing down sheds, I realized that I had never once in almost 2 decades ever once needed to know when a snake shed lasts. It has never come into, it's an utterly useless metric. Why do I need to know that? Like, it's not, unless it's during a reproductive season in the female where it might be a pre-ovulation or post-ovulation shed. But other than that, no. Why would I write down when a baby sheds? That's never information you will ever need to know. So why record that, much less worry about it? It's not worth bothering with. So.
Okay. How often do you change water?
I go through every week and I change everything. I throw the bowl away. I buy cases of various deli cups and I just use them as a liner. I find that is the fastest, most efficient way of doing it. I don't totally hate the planet, so I get the ones that are recyclable and I stack the dirty ones up and I recycle them. Some of them I wipe out and I use them to mix up like fiberglass resin for car projects and stuff, and carbon fiber resin. I use my old water bowl, I wipe them out and use them for mixing up resins and paint. But mostly I just recycle them. Yes, it costs money, but my time costs money. And it's like the idea of like washing 500 water bowls, 800, 900 water bowls sometimes with the babies. I might have 900, even 1,000 snakes. Am I going to wash 1,000 water bowls? And then think about this from a disease prevention and mitigation standpoint. Do you have 1,000 different sponges you're washing those 1,000 water bowls out with? No. You're using the same. If you have a water bowl from a snake, and let's say the snake has got some dread disease, I don't know, make one up, doesn't matter, Ebola, doesn't matter, and it's not manifesting symptoms, and you take your soapy sponge, you wash out its water bowl, everything's great, then you take that same sponge, what are you gonna do? Wash out the next one of the water bowl because you have 700 water bowls to wash. You just cross-contaminated all that shit with that same sponge. That is a massive potential vector for illness. And so the easiest way to cure illness and things like that is to not have the problem, is to not have the problem in the first place by doing dumb stuff. A totally disposable water bowl system saves me. I couldn't even have half the number of snakes I do if I had to wash water bowls by hand.
Yeah.
And it'd be less sanitary if I did. Being able to just like take a sterile I have a heavyweight ceramic base in most of these things. And it basically is just like a receptacle, and the deli cup is like a liner. And I drop the liner in, I fill it up with water. And the next time I come through, I pull the damn thing out, I throw it away, I put in a clean, sterile one. I never cross-contaminated with anything else ever because I never wash it. There is no sponge. There is no soap. It's just a brand new one every time. The babies, it's a brand new, the floor is a paper towel. It's a brand new one every time. Yeah. And I think that's the best way to go for when you get to the point where you got as many snakes as I do. You have to be concerned with biosecurity. I don't have a bunch of freaking sick snakes that are dead and dying, but I don't want to either. And so while you can never eliminate the risk of illness, and you'd be a fool if you think you could, you'd also be a fool if you have a bunch of collections if you think you don't have snakes that have various viruses and God only knows what. All living things are basically petri dishes for microorganisms. That's unavoidable. But you can avoid doing dumb stuff. You should do what you can do to mitigate risk if you have a big collection of animals. You can never eliminate risk, but you can do things to mitigate it, make it less likely that you're going to have a problem. And so that is an easy one. Yes, throw the water bowl away, dispose of water bowls. You're never whole vector for transmission of illness, whether it's viral or bacterial, you've just eliminated completely.
Yeah.
And they're like 3 cents a deli cup when you buy them in a case. So
there you go. What about providing a water bowl large enough for the animal to soak in?
Heck no, terrible idea.
Okay.
Okay. Your snake is covered in its own shit. Whether you realize it or not, it's totally covered in its own crap. Snakes are gross. They're dirty. If you don't know, just get a piebald or a leucistic of some variety, and you'll like notice, like, man, the snakes look like a dirty, what are all these brown streaks all over my pure white snake? It's like you can't take a picture of a leucistic ball python unless it just shed, because it's covered in crud, and most of that crud is its own crap. Because they take a shit and they're crawling around and they brush it up against it, they got poo on their bodies, and then they go sit in a water bowl and then turn around in the poo water. Then you've got like an 80-degree room with fecal contaminated water that's sitting at 80 degrees. It's like, that's the most unsanitary thing you could possibly imagine. Would you go, it'd be like if you had a toilet that people shit and pissed in, even though they flushed it, but there's a little bit of shit left and some streaks in the bowl, and then you had that toilet set at 80 degrees for a goddamn week. Would you go drink out of it? Good Lord, no. But that's what soaking your, that's insane. No, 1,000 times no. I mean, I use 4-inch deli cups for a reason, because they can't get in them.
Yeah.
They can't get in them. Babies can get in the smallest cup because they're babies, but when they get older, they get I got Burmese pythons. They got a 12-ounce deli cup. It's 4 inches in diameter. They ain't getting in shit. I have to give them 2 because they can drink an entire deli cup in one gulp. They can slurp down the whole thing. When I'm giving them water, when I change the water out, I fill up both of them, and then I do that first, and then I do the rest of the room, and I come back to the big snakes, the short-tail pythons, the rock pythons, the big stuff, because a lot of times I'll have to refill it again because they'll just slurp the whole thing down. I'll top them off again, and I'll each have like 2, but I don't want them getting in there because it's going to get contaminated instantly. You don't notice this. You don't notice the poo streaks on your jungle carpet because it's black and yellow and it has colors and a pattern and it breaks it all up. You don't notice how dirty they are, but they are. And when we sit in there, it's like, no, that's a terrible idea from a sanitation standpoint.
What about, how important is day-night cycle?
Pretty important. They are nocturnal, so they are more comfortable at night. So if the lights are on all the time, that's obviously a problem. I mean, if you're going to get rid of one, if you got rid of the day and only had perpetual night, you'd be better off than if you had perpetual day. But they need a day-night cycle. You have an active period and an inactive period. And even in their active period, they're not all that active, but they are, you need to maintain that. They have circadian rhythms just like we do and everything. And you should have a day and night cycle. Absolutely. Most of these pythons are fairly equatorial in their distribution. So you don't get a lot of like photo period differences. So it's mostly 12 on, 12 off kind of a thing, or very close to that. You don't see big, like I live almost in Canada. So we get big swings like, next month and into August, it will be light out until 9:30 at night. It'll be daylight. It's 9:30 at night. It'll still be light out. They don't really get that, but day and night cycle, they're at it's warm in the day, it's cooler at night. You warm up in the day, you hold on to your heat at night. This is you're encouraging normal behavior. You want them to get their heat energy stored up during the day, and then they'll behave normally at night. You don't want to, they don't nothing gets to bask at night in the wild. So turn that stuff off.
What about, what are your thoughts on providing UVB?
No, dumb. I should say dumb. That's dismissive, but it's dumb. They don't need it. We have known that they don't need it. This just keeps coming up. It's like, I don't know why. It's like, no, it's 100% not necessary. Okay. And it's not even, there's not even really much in the way of tangible benefit from it. And there was a paper that was published a couple of years back, like an actual peer-reviewed paper that showed like some very marginal potential upside, but it was like, the fact that you can have snakes for 40 years without even a light at all, I mean, you do not need UV. The reason why your Boelen's pythons don't breed well, or your diamond pythons were getting diamond pythons, is not because of the spectrum of light. It's because you weren't treating them like diamond pythons or Boelen's pythons. You were treating them like other things. Treat them like what they are, problems go away. It is not the spectrum of light. That said, if you want to, things tend to look cooler under full spectrum light. Under natural full spectrum light, it changes the way things look visually to us. And there is some anecdotal evidence that some species that have a lot of yellow pigments will enhance their visual appeal. In that Well, like Brettles pythons. For years, people have noticed that if you take one out of the wild, which no one's really supposed to do down there even, uh, every wild, you'll never find a picture of a dark brown Brettles python in the wild ever. I've never seen one. I've compiled a shitload of pictures of wild Brettles pythons for both these carpet books. And every single solitary one in the wild looks amazing. They are all like awesome in the color department. All of them, 100% are amazing. Some are even more amazing, but the worst one I ever saw was way better than the average captive. The difference being the spectrum of light. We know it's well known that in lizards, that access to full spectrum light will change the color of the lizard. I used to breed green basilisk lizards, which I think are probably the prettiest lizard in the entire world. It looks like a dragon. They're crazy. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Wild green basilisks are kind of like a dark green, kind of a military green kind of color. They're beautiful. Captive bred basilisks that are raised without having access to the actual sun are blue. They're like a powder blue color.
Wow.
And that's the difference. So we know that in some lizards, it does enhance their color. And it may well, and there's some good reason to think that like Brettles pythons and some of those things, it will enhance their color. And it will absolutely do no harm. There is no downside to doing it other than you have to buy the bulbs, which cost money. But you're not going to hurt your snake at all. And it might make it look cooler, might make it, the photos turn out better when you take a picture. It's probably not doing anything. It's probably having no real health impact, but it's certainly not hurting anything. So if you want to do it, knock yourself out.
Okay. No effect on immune function or anything like that, or none that we're aware of?
No, nothing. No, they're fine. It's there's people just keep they just know. It's like, no, it's lizards by and large. If you're an insectivorous lizard, you're not really, you may not get complete nutrition from those bugs. If you're a herbivorous lizard, you may not be getting complete nutrition. You might need solar radiation from the sun to help you synthesize vitamin D3 and properly absorb calcium and that whole nexus of things. Whereas a snake is a nocturnal animal, it's hiding from the sun all day, a python anyway, and it comes out at night when there is no sun. And they're not eating bugs and plants, they're eating whole animals. They don't have a problem getting calcium because they're just digesting a whole animal, skeleton and all. They get everything they need because they're eating complete nutrition by eating a whole animal. So they're not getting, an iguana is not going to get complete nutrition from its diet. So these other sort of factors are going to be more important for them.
Okay.
Whereas python is. So.
All right. Maybe this will be controversial. What would you recommend as an ideal enclosure size for the average adult jungle carpet python?
It depends on how big you let it get. People always want to think that bigger is better, and it isn't. Sometimes bigger is just dumber. I mean, I've seen people with like cages, and I just like scratch my head. Well, they'll have like a 4 foot tall by 4 foot wide by 2 foot deep cage, and like the only thing to climb on is only like 18 inches of the ground, and the top like 28 inches is just dead space, open air. It's like, why does that even exist? It can't utilize that in any way, so it's pointless. I would say, most carpets, if you're being a 2 foot by 2 foot high, 2 foot deep by 4 feet long, you are being generous for most of them. Jungle carpets, males are the larger sex, so everybody gets that wrong, but they don't need to be that large. They can be kept artificially small. So a moderately sized adult male jungle carpet will almost get lost in a 2 foot by 4 foot cage. It's plenty of space. Even a big female, that's plenty of running room. Plenty. If you could give it a 6 foot cage, yeah, sure, knock yourself out, but it's not needed at all in any way.
Could you say that again? Male jungles get larger or generally larger than females?
Well, no. It's another one of those things that people ask all the time, but they think that it's a simple yes or no question, and no one has the attention span to hear the real answer. It's kind of like the adult size thing. It's like it's part and parcel of that. It is, if you look at, basically I tell people the same thing. If you want a smaller snake, get a male. If you want a larger snake, also get a male, oddly. With all the carpet pythons that for which males combat during the breeding season, the record size specimens are always males. Not by much, but by a little. So there's a concept, you could deem it like an alpha male species. Look at it like this. Anytime you have a species when the males will fight over who gets the female, then evolution favors the larger male because the larger male wins the fight more often than he doesn't most of the time, right? And the larger male passes his genes along, and that just perpetuates the cycle of bigger and bigger males. So with carpet pythons, all but 3 of them, the males fight. And wouldn't you know it, in all 5 of those, the record size specimens are all males. Darwin carpet, the record Darwin carpet was like a 10-foot, 2-inch male fished out of somebody's swimming pool in a place called Humpty Doo, which is like on the outskirts of Darwin. A big ass male.
Wow.
It's always an old ass male. In diamond pythons, inland carpets, and southwestern carpets, the males don't really fight, and it's the other way around.
Okay.
So it depends on their mating strategy, but it's the same. It's like look at elephants. What's bigger, male elephants or female elephants? The males are a lot bigger. Why? Because they fight over the females. Like, look at deer, elk, and moose. What do? What are those antlers for? Fighting with other males over the females, and the bigger, badder male wins. Look at gorillas, chimps, and humans. We all fight over girls, don't we? And they're all the same thing, the same pattern that erupts because, you go back to the Neolithic, we're just gorillas driving cars at this point anyway. I mean, it's like, that's where that comes from. That's why you have sexual size dimorphism. If there wasn't that male competition over females, then there'd be a slight advantage to having larger females than males. And in species there is no male competition, that's what you see. In carpets, you see most of them fight, a few of them don't, and that's why that happens. That said, if you were to find, 10 northern coastal / jungle carpets, and you were to find, let's say you found 100 female adults in the wild and 100 male adults in the wild. The average female would be slightly larger by maybe 5 or 10% than the average male. Females will average slightly larger, mostly because they're ever so slightly heavier bodied. Not by much, just enough. But the top 3 giantest ones you found in the whole thing, out of the whole 200, will all be old males. It is probably not an artifact of, genetics. It's probably an artifact of longevity. If a male, since they don't ever really stop growing, females probably don't live as long as males in the wild, just because the cost of reproduction for a male is very minimal. They don't die. They don't mate and die. The act of breeding doesn't kill a male. It's very little effort on his part to breed. A female, I have this happen every year. This happens. Maybe this will be a year it doesn't happen, but most years around here, I'll breed 30 female carpet pythons, and one of them will fucking die. Like, they'll lose so much body weight, they'll lay a giant clutch, and they'll suck so much out of their body that they never quite bounce back, and they'll eat once or twice, and then they'll just crash. They gave up the strain on their body was so extreme to make that clutch of eggs that they crash and burn and literally die. That happens a lot. Wow. It happens more years than it doesn't. One will crash and won't quite recover. So with that said, and I'll intervene. If I have a female get egg bound, I'll intervene and get the eggs out. In the wild, they don't, and they get septic. So I think the average life expectancy for a female that's reproductively active is going to be shorter than that for a male. So it's probably a function of where males get larger because they outlive them. Because it never loses body condition after the breeding season, and it never gets egg bound. It's never vulnerable to predators while it sits on a clutch of eggs for 2 months. It doesn't have any of those problems. Whereas females are probably going to, when they do die in the wild, it's probably going to be something reproductive related, And a male, if they don't ever have that, they might live, 40 years and they eventually edge them out. So males are simultaneously larger and smaller, if you look at it like that.
Okay. Ideal food item mice and rats, do you recommend varying food items, doing chicks, quail, things like that?
There is no real data on this. I feed a fair number of birds, not because I need to, but because if I can get a good deal on some birds. I mean, I got a guy that gives me chickens. He gave me, what did I get? 15 adult ducks. Like they're a smaller breed of duck, like a bunch of adult ducks. I'm like, okay, my Brisbane coastals eat a duck. Like, whatever.
Wow.
Well, they're going to eat birds in the wild. They're going to eat all this stuff in the wild. Carpet pythons, most pythons, period, but Australian carpet pythons and scrub pythons usually go crazy for birds. They love birds. They eat the hell out of birds. So it's not bad. The only downside of feeding birds is that it's kind of like how fiberglass works. Fiberglass works because you have a resin. It's a liquid that gets bound together by small fibers that lock together, and it makes fiberglass. And the snake's shit is kind of like fiberglass in that there's full of mammal hair and poo. And the fur binds the poo together to make a proper turd. Not to get all super crude about it, when you feed a bird, there's no fur, and the feathers don't really act like that. So you end up with very runnier, messier crap. So if you feed I fed my female African rock python like a full-grown rooster. And it took her like 8 hours to swallow this rooster. Rock pythons are famous for eating huge things. And that was fine. Cool. She ate the giant rooster, digested no problem. But oh my God, when they came time to, when I saw that rooster again a week later, it was like, like a bomb went off. Like there's the only downside of feeding birds is on the back end. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's particularly important for carpet pythons as a group because they are mostly mammal feeders that will eat the occasional bird if they can in the wild, but they're primarily eat mammals. But there are other species like black-headed pythons and womas, which are mostly reptile eaters. 80% of a wild black-headed python's diet is reptiles, and only 20% of it's mammals. Reptiles do not store intramuscular fat. So and birds are reptiles. So your chicken is a reptile. And if you eat a piece of chicken, which I eat a lot of chicken every day, boy, you notice you never find a piece of chicken that has marbling like a steak does.
Yeah.
They have subcutaneous fat, but that's it. So they are always leaner. Even the fattest chicken you ever saw is way leaner than any mammal. Mammals store that intramuscular fat. So in species that eat a reptile heavy diet, their body is not physiologically really set up to process all that fat. And so that can cause long-term health problems in species that are reptile eaters. So if you have blackheads and womas and ringed pythons and white-lipped pythons, things that will eat more other types of stuff, using birds, because it's still a reptile, using birds is a much better analog to what they would be eating in the wild. It's not what they would eat in the wild, but nutritionally, its macronutrient profile breakdown would be similar to other reptiles, or much more similar. So it's actually better. I feed my blackheads a lot of birds. Adult quail. My big female blackhead, she ate one of those ducks.
Okay.
She ate the duck. It took her almost a day to swallow this giant duck. She went in a hide box. I didn't see that snake for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
She's just gone for like 2 weeks. Just went and hunkered down. But so birds definitely have their place. I have a lot of them in the freezer.
Okay.
Variety it's not, I don't know that there's a big advantage to it with like things like a carpet python, but there is, again, it's like the UV. There is no downside at all. None. And, if you want to, knock yourself out. And with some things, there is a measurable upside.
Right on. Now, what about feeding frequency? I know you said don't run off of a schedule, but that first year to 2 years of life, what are you looking at feeding a jungle carpet?
I would say weekly is most people want to get into a habit, and once a week is perfectly fine. You could go every 5 days if you really wanted to, but you're really starting to push them at that point. So definitely not more than every 5 days. Once a week is perfectly adequate. What you want to do is, as the animal puts on size and mass and gets closer and closer to adulthood or sexual maturity, you want to slowly pull the throttle back. You don't want to just keep feeding every 7 days until the thing's an adult. You want to ease into adulthood.
Okay.
It's not a race. People
Yeah.
look at things like it's a race too much, and it's detrimental to the animal. So you take your time. If you feed things fairly conservatively, in 4 or 5 years, it's going to be an adult, regardless of what you do. It's going to get there. So
Yeah.
you don't need to do it. If your snake is an adult and a year and a half old, you've fed it way too much. No snake in the wild is getting to adulthood in 18 months.
Okay.
I've caught a lot of wild pythons, and you'll find like a really pretty small python, nowhere near adult size, with like an enormous head because it's like an old ass snake. That's you found a yearling or so gelatin that had just been hit by a carpet in Gelatin, Queensland, that had just been hit by a car. It wasn't quite dead yet, unfortunately. I thought it was fine, but it actually had been dead. It looked perfect, but it wasn't moving right. It was near death, but not dead. But it was basically about the size of like your average captive, like 6-month-old, but it had the head of a 18-month-old. This giant fucking head on it.
Wow.
Because it was probably an older snake that just taking a long time to get to. They're not growing. People in the hobby have developed way too unrealistic expectations for growth and how fast things are supposed to mature. And they push things too hard as a result.
Yeah, you see that a lot. You see big bodies with little heads in captivity.
Yeah. And that sometimes you can push that so hard that you don't get any offspring. In that all the growth just goes in, you make the body bigger, and it actually delays the onset of secondary sexual characteristics, i.e. puberty. So you might have like an adult-sized juvenile.
Wow.
Yeah, it's stupid. And it's all just greed. Quit feeding the snake that much. It'll get there. You don't need to do that. It's maddening.
Okay. So every 1 to 2 weeks, and then once they're 4 to 5 years old, then what are you doing? Once a month?
As necessary, maybe.
Yeah.
It depends, though. If it is an animal that has excellent body condition and it's a male that's not going to lose body condition, or a female that you're not breeding, then that's one thing. If it is a female that you know you're going to breed, you need to kind of pad it a little bit with some extra calories. Or it's a female you just got done laying a clutch and you need to recover some body condition. So what you would feed, like you could have 2 females that are siblings and they're the same exact size. And if one of them is going to get bred the next couple of years in a row and one is not, you wouldn't feed them the same. You're going to need to feed the one that's going to be breeding a lot more than the one that's not, because the one you're just trying to maintain good body mass and muscle tone. The other one you need to give it a slight surplus, and then you got to rebuild after this giant, loss in condition. So it just depends. Males are a lot more forgiving because they generally don't lose much in the way of body condition. I feed them all enough to maintain good body mass and muscle tone, but not really grow. And where that balancing point is might be different for every snake. Some you need to feed a little more, some a little less. But I don't write it down. There's no like label, or I'm not writing down when I fed this snake last or that other snake last. It's not like that. I just look at them, and you kind of know. It's like you don't want your snakes to be round sausages. You want them to be lean and muscular and fit. And that's what you want for longevity and good reproduction. It's not, big, fat, obese snakes.
Yeah. All right. What are, wrapping this up now, what are some potential health concerns that can come up?
Potential health concerns?
Yeah, like respiratory infections, things like that.
Yeah,
anything to look out for? Or?
It's all the same stuff that affects everything else. I mean, the hobby got itself all Twitter-pated about nidovirus the last couple of years, which is kind of a, turns out not to be the apocalypse we were promised. But it's the problem when you talk about diseases is that we don't know anything. We know this much. Like if your snake gets a disease that's, let's say it's viral. If it gets sick, it's most likely not viral. It's most likely bacterial. If it gets something that's viral, the most likely virus it's going to encounter is a virus that we've never encountered. If you know how many thousands of viruses afflict every organism on the planet, there are thousands of viruses. for every species of everything. And we know of about 5 that infect pythons. That's it. Which means if there's 1,000 and we know of 5, that means there's 995 of them we don't know about. So the most likely thing they're going to catch is a thing we've never even encountered before. But like a lot of things, they present similar. And you can't, I don't believe there's a lot of reason to get super worked up about hypotheticals and worrying about stuff that's beyond your control. Do the best you can with what you have. Don't be a fool. Don't assume that you're immune, quarantine your snakes. That should be a thing, right? Like, oh my God, like, and I don't care who it comes from. You quarantine it for a period of time. Sometimes, depending on the source, a long period of time. But nothing just gets stuck in your snake room. Everything gets set aside on a white piece of paper for observation. Everything gets treated for mites. Well, I don't give a shit who it comes from, because the number one health problem you're going to get is mites. That's always the number one thing. And too many people are too lax about, God, not to harp on ball python people all the time, but the number of people I know is like just buy some adult female from some dude in Georgia they never met, and they're just immediately breeding it like a week later. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you're just, it's like, maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe you won't. Like, I'm not doing that. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if I'm going to get something that, I don't ever buy adult snakes from anybody ever, full stop. But if I did, I'd at least do it like 6 months before I was going to breed it so I could properly vet the animal before I introduce it to anything else. An ounce of precaution is worth a lot more. It's a lot easier to prevent a problem than it is to fix one after the fact. Yeah, they'll get the garden variety respiratory infection, which is usually always caused by Pseudomonas, which is basically normal gut flora. What happens is, with most garden variety respiratory infections in snakes, and carpets are certainly in that group also, it is usually not a thing that they caught. It's not a pathogen that they caught from outside or from some other snake. It's something that was always living in them anyway that became a problem. Things like Pseudomonas can cause illness, but if you were to test all of your snake collection for Pseudomonas, I would bet you 90% of them would come up positive for Pseudomonas. You probably have Pseudomonas. It's one of those things that everything has. And it's not a problem with a normally functioning immune system. It keeps that stuff in check, and it doesn't manifest illness. Having a virus in your system doesn't really mean shit. It doesn't. Fun fact, you are 4% viruses. 4% of the human genome is viruses. Viruses that our ancestors, all the way back to the primordial soup, have been encountering viruses since as long as there's been life, there's been viruses. And when viruses, they borrow little bits of DNA from things they infect, and they leave little presents for our descendants in our genomes. So a not insignificant percentage of the human genome is you are literally made out of viruses, as are the snakes. It's not a thing you're ever going to get rid of. And it's not, be careful, do what you can, and quit worrying about stuff. The garden variety RIs and stuff, it's usually something that was always already within the animal anyway. And then because the introduction of stressful stimuli, whether that is temperatures that are way too hot, way too cold, some other outside stressor, when reptiles become stressed, it hampers immune function. And when they're stressed enough and it drops their immune function enough, their immune system is no longer able to keep that thing that's been there minding its own business for years in check. And then it can possibly manifest illness. So what's the first thing I tell you? Your snake gets an RI. Quit stressing it out. Make sure the temperatures are totally dialed. It's got somewhere to hide. It's got all these environmental parameters, and quit fucking with it. Remove all external stress so its immune system will function optimally and stuff. But that's the thing. People, they think that snakes are just like catching an illness from the snake next to them, or that it's like that can happen. It's usually something that was already there that manifested illness that had been minding its own business previously.
Right on.
So,
well, thanks,
do what
sir.
you can within reason, but don't stress yourself out about shit that's outside of you. People in life spend way too much time stressing about things that are outside of their control. We're all control freaks, and we think that we can control everything in our environment around us, and you can't. Nor can you control it in your snake's environment. You can do what you can do, and you should do the things that you can do to mitigate the risk of illness or whatever problems might befall you. But since you can never eliminate them, there's no point in worrying about things that are outside of you, that are external to you, and you can't control. That's insane. It's like, do what you can do, and then cross your fingers and hope for the best, and enjoy your hobby. And something will eventually go wrong, because it always does eventually, doesn't it? And then you pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and you keep going. It's getting paranoid about stuff, I guess.
All right, cool. Well, that's the care sheet for jungle carpets.
Super easy.
I know it. I'm
A
taking into
couple on the care things, a couple things that are personal favorites of mine that apply to all carpets, but definitely to jungle carpets as well that I'd recommend. I see too many people with cages that have like their idea of putting a branch in it is like wedged in from corner to corner, going at a 45-degree angle. That is shit. And the snake doesn't want to use that. Your snake does not want to use a rope swing or a rope or any of that stuff at all. Snakes don't want a perch that is at a weird angle or that is moving. They want something that's solid and secure. So what you want are branches that are roughly equivalent to the diameter of the snake's body at mid-body, and you want them horizontal, and you bolt them in, screw them in, glue them in so they are rock solid and they feel secure. If you want the snake to sit on them, you make the spot on the branches where you want the snake to sit 80 to 82 degrees. And guess what that snake's going to do? It's going to park. It's got the perfectly comfortable place to sit at right temperature. If you just pick a small plastic, like some silk plants or whatever, and put some leaves from a silk plant that kind of hang over the spot, that snake can sit at a branch that has a Y in it. Like you get a branch that's like a fork in the branch. They love that. That's the most comfortable thing in the world for a carpet. They'll sit right in that notch in the branch where it Y's off. They'll sit right there every time, coiled up like a chondro. If you get a notch, you put that in the right spot, you make the temperature 80 to 82 degrees with a little leaf cover right over that spot, that snake is going to park its ass right there and display front and center for everybody. Because it feels secure because it feels kind of partially hidden by the leaves. It's this perfectly comfortable branch that it wants to grab onto. The temperature is perfect. You can kind of get them to do that. And the other thing is I'm a big believer. I can't remember the guy's name. I wish I could remember to give him props. It's probably 20 years ago, an Australian guy. He, instead of having a hide box sitting on the floor, it was like a cat litter pan. He bolted it to the ceiling on like little tracks and put a hole in it. So I do it with all my cages. Their hides are all ceiling mounted hides because it basically adds a loft to it adds a second additional floor space. Yeah. I have a bunch of 4-foot cages. They have 8 square feet of floor space, but there's another 2.5 square feet in a hide box that's on the ceiling. So I actually have 10.5 square feet of floor space that only takes up 8 square feet of floor space because there's a second floor. And that mimics what all carpets naturally do this. They love tree hollows. They're tree hollow specialists. Rotted out, burned out eucalyptus trees and stuff. You get in that tree hollow, and then what do? They spend all their time hidden in the hide box with their head just poking out the hole, looking down, waiting for something to walk down below them they can eat. While they feel totally secure. They will use it. It mimics their natural tendencies and instinctive behaviors and everything. It adds more floor space to your cage, makes more functional, usable space. It's a win-win. Makes it easier if the snake's an asshole. It makes it easier to clean the cage because it's probably in the hide. You clean the whole bottom of the cage, no problem. It's a win-win for everybody. So ceiling mounted hides, look into it and bolt your perches in properly.
Right on. The picture of that jungle I sent you before. What, the one I'm talking about, the orange one?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that? I mean, that's a beautiful animal, but it's the polar opposite to the black and yellow jungle.
Yeah, because it looks like a real jungle carpet.
Yeah.
If you go to, I hate saying far north Queensland, they always say that about jungle carpets, but it's really a very localized coastal strip of rainforest habitat from Cairns up to about the Black Mountain corridor. It's a fairly confined geographic area. It's not very big where you find these things. You will find jungle carpets. They're not even hard to find. They're fairly easy to find. But you'll find all sorts of colors and patterns and looks. But what you will almost certainly not find is a neon yellow and velvety jet black snake. You will never find that. That is captivity. That is everybody. When jungle carpets started getting bred in captivity 40 years ago, it's literally been 40 years, all the different looks you see in the wild population were represented. But the hobby, in its eminently short-sightedness, decided that the only look that really mattered was bright yellow and black. That's all that mattered. And so what happened is that's what everything got steered towards, yellow and black, yellow and black, yellow and black. And all the other looks went away. The most common look you will find in the wild is a 3-colored snake, not a 2-color snake. It is black, yellow, and brown. You will have like yellowish of some shade of yellowish, and then it'll be bordered in black, but then in the interspacing between the yellow bands, the black will fade to like a brown color. And it's awesome. And you never see it because we expunged it from the hobby intentionally. So I'm actually trying to reverse engineer and bring brown back into jungle carpets, which is a weird thing to do, but I like that natural look. And so when you see that animal you're talking to, I actually have 3 of its clutch mates. And some of them, 2 of them are fairly similar. That is from a very old bloodline, bloodline that goes back to the dawn of time, that has never been really tainted with other stuff. And so that retains some of that stuff, some of those looks. So that's what that is. So yeah, people now is like, oh, look at this awesome jungle carpet. Oh, you mean the one that looks like it could actually be a wild snake? Looks like they normally would look like. That's modern jungle carpets are basically a morph at this point, in that they are so selectively bred that they don't really resemble their wild counterparts much. They're so refined that they're almost a morph. And that's, well, I think a bright yellow and black snake is cool. And there are yellow and black jungle carpets in the wild. You will find some that are black and yellow, but they're not like some of these ones in captivity. Some of the ones I'm going to produce this year are just like, you're never going to find that in the wild. They're so refined, but I appreciate the natural look of things. So my favorite jungle carpets are probably my Palmerston locality jungles, which look like a snake. They look like you plucked them out of a tree. They're not even yellow. For the most part, they're gold. They're black and gold. They're not even yellow. There's no yellow on most of them. I do have one female that laid a clutch it's a yellow snake, but it's one of the few that I have ever produced that actually was yellow. They're usually black and a nice golden color, which is a much more natural looking thing. And striping is really common in that area. So I think that's just as beautiful as any bright yellow and black snake. And I make those too, but yeah.
Well, that animal that I sent you the picture of, I mean, that looked exactly like the first page in the More Complete Carpet Python, the picture of that jungle.
That picture is taken by my friend Scott in Australia, and I love Scott Eiper. I love that. I told him, like, God damn, I love that snake. Like, if you look at the picture, it has like 3 inches of its tail. It's almost like 12 inches of tail got bitten off by something and ate it, no doubt. But it's like, it is so just, that is a good looking jungle carpet. It doesn't look anything like what most people think, and I think that's stunning.
So, yeah, I want one of those. I mean, I hope you can produce some of those siblings.
You have to reverse engineer them. You have to like selectively breed to get rid of the neon yellow and jet black thing.
Yeah.
You have to be holding back animals that have brown on them and just doing the exact opposite of other people. So, I mean, I'm working on it. I'm trying. I'm trying to. Might make some progress next season.
You said you have 3 of the clutch mates to that animal?
Yeah. I have how many? What do I have? I have 1, 2. I have 4.1. I have 2.1 that are from that one, but I also already had that bloodline, and I've had it for years, and so I have a couple of males that are from that same stock as well.
I'll be waiting for babies.
I had one that was black, yellow, and brown. It was amazing, and I could not get that thing to breed. I finally just parted with it. I tried like 5 years in a row. It was just a dud. It was just the male he just would not breed. Like, wow. I was like so pissed. Like, come on. It had the look I wanted, and I finally gave up after years of trying. It was just never going to get with the program.
What is the deal with the JAG mutation in jungles?
Well, there is no JAG mutation in jungles, but I mean, it's a northern coastal thing, and since jungles are northern coastals, I guess you might be able to say that. But what do you mean? What's the deal with it? What do you mean?
Well, that was my question. Is that a mutation that is in jungles, or has it come from a different animal?
It came from a northern coastal that got bred into jungles. So, although taxonomically, like, it's murky. A jungle carpet is not a genetically distinct entity. A jungle carpet is just a rainforest color phase of northern coastal carpet, which has a huge range. And so the mutation occurred in that larger population of animals we traditionally called coastals, which we now call northern coastals. And then people bred them to jungles to make brighter yellow jags and this sort of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have very many of them. I tried to expunge them from my collection entirely, just because the morph has baggage and I don't want to deal with it. And then I accidentally produced a few this year. I'll probably produce a few more. It's like, well, like I proved out the first super caramel coastals, and I produced one of the ones that proved out was a super caramel tiger jag. So it's an amazing yellow and orange snake with a stripe. It's absolutely a ridiculous look. The animal is ridiculous. It's insane looking. And I decided I didn't want to make jags anymore, so I just retired her. She's like 14 years old, and then I lost a couple of snakes who were her sisters. I had two of her sisters. I had three of her sisters. I had two super caramel jag females and two super caramels that weren't jags. And I sent the other jag off to a friend. And then I lost, over like a 2-year period, I lost both of the female super caramels that weren't jags. They were like 10 years old that laid a bunch of clutches. One had reproductive problems, and one just kind of croaked for no reason, as snakes like to do sometimes. And so the only definite proven super caramel I had was this jag. So I had to bring her out of retirement to make, just so I could breed her to a super caramel male and make more super caramels that weren't jags. I had to breed the jag to get the animals that weren't jags. And then I get a clutch of 19 eggs, and there's exactly one female super caramel that's not a jag. Out of like 19 eggs, like 15 of them were jags. It was ridiculous. Wow. And all the other ones were males. There's like the whole clutch was to get one snake, which I have. It's a subadult now. But yeah, I hatched the first ever exanthic caramel jag. And I didn't want it to keep it because it was a jag, but it was so beautiful. I just couldn't bring myself to sell it. It was like this weird pale gray and pink snake. It was so cool looking. I just like kept it. And then now I just eventually got to be an adult, and I just hatched a clutch from her. So it happens. I don't really want to make them, but they seem like I haven't made any in 4 years. And this year I've got a couple of clutches with jags in them, 2 clutches. So.
Right on. All right, man. Well, I know you got to go eat. I know it's past your feeding time.
Yeah,
you're probably getting hangry now. Could you just one quick thing? Gelatin jungles aren't really jungles, right?
No.
Okay.
That is complicated, but basically, when you look at their genomes, everything. You have 3 different populations of carpets on the east coast of Australia. You've got diamonds in the south, southern coastal, 4 actually, sorry. Southern coastals, northern coastals, which includes jungles, and then variegata on the base of the Cape York Peninsula. You have a well-known biogeographic breakpoint in a place called the Black Mountain Corridor. It's not a complete barrier to animal movements, but it basically keeps a lot of things, what's north, and south. Invariably, whatever is in the north, from north of that point, is also in New Guinea. So if you look at the frilled dragons, the frilled lizards, they're in the Cape York Peninsula from that point north. They're exactly the same as you find in New Guinea. But if you look at the ones in Northern Territory, they're different. If you look at the water pythons in the Northern Territory, and then you look at the water pythons in the Cape York Peninsula of Australia, they're different. But the ones in New Guinea are exactly the same as the ones in Cape York Peninsula. If you look at the chondros, a Maruki chondro and an Australian chondro are genetically the same snake. You can't really tell them apart. Over and over and over again, you see the same distribution pattern. So everything from north of the Black Mountain Corridor, from basically around Gelatin is like the extreme southern bit of it, all the way up through the tip of the Cape York Peninsula, including the islands in the Torres Strait that have carpet pythons on them, and southern New Guinea, there isn't 2 shits difference genetically between a Gelatin and a New Guinea carpet. They don't look anything alike. They look like if nature was to make an exanthic. Like they have the same pattern distribution, the same blushing, but the yellow saturation is turned way down. They basically look like a nature-made exanthic poplin carpet. And genetically, they basically aren't hardly any different from a poplin carpet. So that's what that is. But then you get to on the other side of that, the black and yellow jungles that butt right up against the other side of that break point are a genetically distinct entity from them. So, but everything that has that above and spotted pythons just got split into a couple of species, into 2 different subspecies. And guess what? The Cape York spotted pythons are peninsularis now, and the other ones are maculosa. And guess where the break point is between them? It's exactly the same point at Black Mountain Corridor. Exactly the same place. It splits. that's the break point for all these species. There are birds. There's a bunch of things that share that same thing. Right at that latitude. Basically, if you look at a map of the Cape York Peninsula and you look for a tiny town called Coranda, Coranda is actually in the bottleneck. It's in the Black Mountain corridor. It's in that gap, basically. And then everything above Coranda is one thing. Everything below Coranda is another thing.
So what the hell kind of spotted python did I get from Ryan Young?
A normal spotted python.
Okay.
Maculosa. Ryan hasn't made a Cape York spotted python in probably 15 years. Okay. Neither have I, but I have two clutches incubating for the first time in over a decade.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, finally. It's been a long time. I like them quite a lot. But yeah, no, those are, knowing Ryan, they're probably the Canadian ones.
Okay. Yeah, striped with the stripe down the back.
Yeah, that line is like, does really well. They eat, they grow. They're really easy to get feeding. I have some from them too, of course. And I love them. They're great.
Yeah, I want to breed them. They look like
you will easily succeed. Their Antaresia are easy to breed. Cool. They're very, very willing to breed. I think it's a situation where because they occupy a lower tropic level in their environment, there's never a point where any Antaresia is off the menu. Even the adults are still food for other things. So animals that in that situation, that's their what you call a tropic level. They're at a lower level in the food chain. You know, the top of the food chain is your apex predator. They are definitely not that. They are always on the menu for something. And animals that occupy lower tropic levels tend to have higher reproductive output because they have to flood the zone with babies all the time because even the adults are going to get eaten, much less all the babies are going to get eaten. They can't afford to be picky about when they ovulate and how hard what they need to breed. They breed fast and young and as soon as they can, and they put out as many babies as they can. That's their strategy. Whereas more apex predators, things like scrub pythons in Australia, this sort of stuff, they famously have very low reproductive output and very slow to mature because if they didn't, they would overpopulate. You need to find that equilibrium in your ecosystem where the predator-prey relationships work out and everything. And you can't have too many apex predators that nothing can eat. They overstrip their food resources. So they tend to, you see a clear tendency towards lower reproductive output and smaller numbers of offsprings, later onset of sexual maturity in apex predator species, and just the opposite. Look at things like mice that are the go-to food source for everything. Well, they're like 2 months old, they're having babies, and they're like, you can have 3 generations, 4 generations of mice in a single year because they only live for a couple of years. They live fast and furious, crank out a ton of offspring, and then they get eaten by somebody.
Wow.
So the Antaresia are closer to the bottom than they are to the top, so they will be easy for you to breed.
Damn, dude. I love talking about this stuff with you. You got so much crazy knowledge stirring around up there.
Yeah, I'm old, so it's had a long time for it to accumulate.
Do you ever do maternal incubation?
Yes, I've done a ton of it. If you look at the book, like all the maternal incubation experiments done with all the data collection, that was all me. Okay. I also did a very similar thing for the Antaresia book. I did a bunch of other oddball species for a giant article I was writing that never got published on maternal incubation. So I did olive pythons, rough scale pythons. I've lost a lot. I probably lost $20,000 in income on an article I never published. Just in eggs that didn't hatch because things were shitty at maternal incubation. Yeah, it's wow. But yeah, I've done a lot of it. I don't do it anymore. Not because you can't, but because, again, it's one of these disease prevention things that I just do, not because I even think it's really necessary, but because it makes other people happy. It makes them feel good, I guess. Creates this blanket of false sense of security that people like. Most viruses, including the one that people are all worked up about now, doesn't seem to pass the egg membrane. Meaning if you have an animal that is infected and it lays a clutch of eggs, the babies do not hatch out with said disease. They don't. So and the virus in question cannot survive more than about 48 hours outside of its host. You take eggs from female, even if they're covered in viruses all over the outside, and you sit them there for 2 days and don't touch them in the incubator, all the virus is then dead. And the babies hatch out completely clean and free of anything. If you were allowed a female to maternally incubate, and she had said virus or viruses, there would be a possibility that she could then, at the point of hatching, pass that on to the offspring. So now, which sucks, I don't get to enjoy maternal incubation just to make other people happy about a disease that isn't really that big of a deal. But that's what it is. I take all the eggs, put them in my incubator room, then they go straight into my baby room for newly hatched baby, basically a nursery. It's my office. And they're not even exposed to yearling snakes. Their only thing in the room is babies from that year.
Wow.
That have never seen their mother and never will, and they've been maintaining a clean room sort of condition. I won't even go from one snake building or snake room to the other without showering between.
Jeez.
It's a real pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't actually have a bunch of disease problems or anything. It's not like I'm trying to prevent something from breaking my it's like I'm trying to just like make people happy and doing things to reassure people that I'm doing everything that can be done, even though it's a complete pain in the ass and I question my sanity for doing it a lot of times. But I do that. So sometimes I might have to take 2-3 showers a day during this time of year, because I'll have to go pull eggs out of the adult room and then be in the incubator room, but then also be in my office. And I can't do any of that. I can't backtrack in any of this stuff. It's like, it's ridiculous. Like I'll go from the baby room to a different room, but I can't go from backwards chronologically. I have a whole system. It's really inefficient. It requires a lot of showering and a lot of clothing changes.
So you're your only employee?
Yeah, I know, it's just me.
Good for you, man. That's freaking wild.
If you buy a snake for me, you're buying a snake for me, and I know everything about that snake.
Yeah.
I mean, not to like be hard on guys like Mike Wilbanks or whatever, who cranks up thousands of ball pythons, or Justin, I guess he's the ball python king now for this latest round. But if you buy a snake from Justin, you are likely buying a snake he's not even aware of its existence. These guys are making 1,000 snakes and they have like 8 people working for them. You're probably buying a snake they've never even personally laid eyes on. It's like, well, you're not. I mean, if you buy something from me, I can tell you everything about it. It is my reputation that's on the line. It's all me. I would never trust that with anybody else. Like I'd happily pay somebody. God, I wish I could find somebody I could pay to do my rodents, but I would never trust somebody else to move snakes around. I have to know who the father is of a clutch. I can't play the Who's Your Daddy mystery clutch game.
Yeah.
Like everybody else does. I keep ridiculous ancestry records on this stuff. I have to know what bloodline and keep meticulous record keeping. And you can't do that if you're letting other people move your snakes around. No, I don't trust anybody else to be as diligent. So I'm limited in what I can do to what I can do as a single individual.
I got one of your female jungles, and yeah, your lineage is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. I've got a clutch right now of ivories that are 88% ivories, and after almost 30 years, I'm trying to figure out how to even make this chart. Like I'm trying to how to make it so it's legible. Like, cause there's a lot of common ancestors and relations and all that. It's like trying to get lines that don't overlap other lines and make it confusing. It's getting to be difficult to figure out how to do that. I think I might have to start. I usually just use white lines that connect everything. I might have to use red lines for the maternal lineage and white lines for the paternal lineage. So if they cross over, you can still see, oh, this is this and this is this. I think I'm going to have to go to that with some of these because the trees have gotten so big over the years. Some of these have like 7, 8 generations. They're just truly huge things. So,
jeez,
tedious. So.
All right, man. Well, we're done with snakes. Real quick, what's your favorite lift?
Lift?
Yeah.
It's got to be the bench press. Who are we kidding, right? Like that's like it's got to be the bench press. And I'm really strong for an old guy, so it's like, and I get no greater pleasure going to the gym being in my early 50s and knowing that I am vastly stronger than all these guys who are in their 20s that are all, you could tell because they're the ones sitting there taking video of themselves with their cell phone of them lifting wimpy weight with bad form. And I'm like literally older than their dad. And I'm so much bigger than they are that I have this swift and certain knowledge that if the zombie apocalypse were to happen at that moment, that I would literally kill and eat those guys. Like they would just become my protein. That's how much, I love that.
What do you bench?
I've had to back away from ego lifting because if you realize you hit 50, I can't afford to tear a pec.
Yeah.
So now I haven't maxed in about a year. And the last time I maxed was 415.
Jesus Christ.
Uh, Typically, I don't ever have a spotter because I've never had a lifting partner. So it's just me by myself for like 10 years doing this. And like I'll go as high as like 335 for like 5 or 6 reps without a spotter because I'm confident I'll get it. But that one rep that you might not get, I won't go for that,
Yeah.
So I'll go to 3 plates or maybe a little bit more. But a lot of times it's like, 225 for 4 sets of 20. Like you
That's
get to
insane.
20 reps at 225 gets real heavy after a while.
That's
You know,
crazy.
yeah, but I mean, I have like this biomechanical advantage, even though I'm old. Like I have like really wide shoulders and a really thick chest and relatively short arms. So I have like this mechanical advantage. Like if you're a tall dude, like I don't have to push that because I hit my chest is pretty well developed. I hit my chest fairly early on, even with my back flat, and I have relatively short arms and a wide grip. So I'm like my pressing distance, I'm only having to move that bar maybe 16, 17 inches, maybe tops. Some of these
Yeah.
taller dudes, they got to move it 6 inches. They look like 6 inches further than me. And with a
Yeah.
longer arm, you stretch that muscle over the same amount of muscle over a longer lever, you lose leverage, you lose mechanical advantage. So I'm like, genetically, I was built for the bench press.
Nice. What's your favorite
So,
cardio?
not doing any. Not doing any. Fuck that. Like, I used to run, and it's like, it's so hard when you get older. Dude, don't ever get old. It sucks.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I would just, yeah, it's 0 stars. Would not recommend. My knees are so tore up and everything that to run and everything, it's like it's so hard on my knees now that I just don't do it. I need to probably do it. I'm trying to cut finally, and I'm actually almost at my goal weight for the summer, but I'm like, I want to get sub 200 pounds.
You ever do
So,
like just incline treadmill or stair stepper or something like that?
yeah, the last few times I've tried to get myself to do it, just the incline treadmill or stair stepper, but usually just the treadmill cranked all the way up and listen to some podcast or something to take my mind off the misery. But
Yeah.
I need to probably do it again. I need to probably getting the last like I would love to get down to like 195, and I'm only about 5'8", but I'm like a pretty thick dude. So if I get to 195, I'm shredded at 195. Like
Yeah.
now I'm like at 203, so not too bad. But it's like if you spend any time in the gym, you're never happy with your body. You're just
No.
always it's just like it's always just varying degrees of disappointment. It's like, oh, I need to lose more of this. I need more of this, and man, my traps are really suck. My traps aren't developed. It's like I don't
Yep.
know, but
Yep.
it's good for your mental clarity and everything to get your frustrations out of the gym.
Do you do how much protein do you do in a day?
I have an incredibly low. I'm a super endomorph guy, and I'm old, so you wouldn't believe how little I eat. And I also used to be super fat, so I lost 120 pounds
Fuck yeah.
about 10 years ago, and then got into bodybuilding and stuff after that. So I was 310 pounds, and I got down to like 189 pounds, and then
No
I
shit.
yeah, I was a meatball. You can find pictures of me on the internet that are frankly pretty embarrassing. So I lost all the weight, and then got into started putting on lean mass and all that. But now, when you get super heavy like that for so long, your body, I have to thread a needle nutritionally. I can't just eat like anything close to a normal person because I fucked my metabolism up so badly for so long. So I'll be paying for that for the rest of my life. But I eat on my current cut, I'm on 1,600 calories a day.
Oh my God.
And that is enough to just barely lose like a half a pound a week if I'm lucky. But because I have so much lean muscle mass, I need to adhere to the gram per pound philosophy, which is backed by science pretty conclusively. So that means I need to eat about 220 grams of protein. But if you're only going to eat 1,600 calories, that doesn't leave a lot. My macro split is 25, 25, 50% protein, 25 carbs, 25 fats.
Shit.
But at 1,600 calories, it's a freaking slog. It's sometimes tough to eat that much protein.
I eat 3,200 to
I was
4,000
drinking a
calories a day.
strawberry banana protein shake while we were talking earlier. Like, yeah, like 1,800 to 1,900 is about maintenance for me.
Wow.
But when you're old, though, your metabolism slows way down.
Yeah. I used to be like 260, 270, and I got down to 165 when I met my wife. So
How
that was
tall are
about
you?
5'11.
So you got a good 3 inches on me. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I was, but I had no muscle. I mean, I was totally sedentary, and yeah, it was a big weight loss, and now I eat 3,200 to 4,000 calories a day, and
Oh my
just
God. Yeah, I would know.
constantly
That's
moving.
more than I eat every. That's 2.5 days of eating for me. Um, but I can go in there and I've retained a lot of lean mass. So it doesn't take much when you're old, I guess. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's keep my protein up. And yeah,
I'm at
no, it sucks.
190
I mean,
now. I'm at 190 now. You got some serious lean mass going on for your height.
oh yeah, no, I'm, yeah, um, I mean, I'm not that tall, I suppose, but I'm like fairly thick, I guess,
Yeah.
robustly built. Uh,
How about creatine?
I don't know. I like what?
How about creatine?
Oh, of course, yeah. That's the most studied supplement in the world. I mean, but I got to take old guy shit too. Like, oh my god, like I got to take glucosamine for my joints and my fish oil for my heart, all this other stuff I got to do every day. And then been on TRT for probably like 7 years. That makes a huge difference too.
Yeah.
So you get older, definitely look into that if you need to for sure, because
How are you doing the
that's a game
TRT? Are
changer.
you doing weekly or every other week?
Neither. There's a third way to do it that's way better.
Daily?
Um, yeah, but I'm not getting shots at all. Like I'm just taking 2 pills.
Oh, okay.
I take one small dose of Clomid every single day, and then a tiny, one half of a tiny pill once a week of anastrozole, which is an estrogen blocker. I have to get labs done twice a year to make sure they don't overprescribe stuff. They're legally allowed to prescribe you up to whatever. They have a fairly generous, sort of range they consider normal for people of whatever age and all this kind of stuff. And they can get you up to the high end of that range, but not beyond it, or they'll have to cut you back. So I am perpetually at the highest end of the normal range, which isn't really normal. I think the average for a guy at 51, the average is like 300 to 400 milliliters per deciliter of
Yeah.
tea, and I'm at 850, 900.
Fuck yeah.
So, oh yeah, it's way better. No, it wouldn't. I mean, yeah, it's way better. It's not like super physiological levels like if I was taking a bunch of gear or something, but it definitely helps retain muscle mass. Doesn't seem to do shit for helping me burn more calories though.
Yeah.
Still like the weight thing. But you were heavier. When you get fat, they don't tell you this, but your fat cells don't go away. They just stay there. They just drain all the lipids out and they stay there. It's like if you made a bunch of water balloons and
Yeah.
stuck them all to your body, and then you lose weight, you drain all the water out of the water balloons, but the fucking balloons are still there. So if you misbehave for 5 minutes, you eat anything you shouldn't eat, it's really easy to just refill a balloon that already exists. Then it would be harder to make a balloon and fill it. But you just got to fill an already existing balloon. Super easy. So
Yep.
I'll go on like a reptile expo weekend and I'll eat off the reservation for freaking 2 days. I'll gain like 6 pounds. The most insane amount of, it's like, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
Um, so I have to take all my food with me when I go on. I can't do it when I go on these trips, but when I go on like reptile expos, I'm taking a giant cooler full of prepped meals and trying to really mitigate the damage. But yeah, it's tough.
Man, I can't imagine eating 1,600 calories in a day. I eat that by noon.
I can't imagine eating 3,000. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I'm
That's why
so
I do so much cardio just for that reason, so I can just eat more because I love to eat.
I was since I cooked professionally for a good long while, I have pretty extraordinary kitchen skills, so I can make healthy stuff that tastes good. So the food I eat tastes delicious. I eat very well,
Yeah.
but because I mean, I'm basically like a ninja with cauliflower. I guess I can do anything with I can make anything taste good, and so it turns out. And then if you eat clean, healthy food, it's surprisingly low in calories. Like it If you eat 8 ounces of chicken breast, it's only 220 calories. That's 44 grams of protein.
Yeah.
It's like almost nothing. It's a half a pound of chicken breast. 25% of my daily allotment of protein is only 220 calories.
Oh yeah.
So,
All right, man. Well, I wanted to ask you all that shit because I know you're a gym rat and everything. That's an
yeah,
impressive weight loss too.
yeah. Some days you gotta. I don't know. I think you just gotta take responsibility for yourself. And when you're heavy, you got an excuse for everything, don't you? It's always a reason why. It's like eventually you realize these excuses are all bullshit. I need to take responsibility for my own self and do something about it.
Yeah.
And it took me a lot of false starts before I eventually stuck with it. But now I can't imagine going to the gym. It'd be
Yeah.
crazy.
I want to see some of those pictures. I gotta dig in your Facebook.
Oh my God, you got to go way back, but it's pretty bad. Like some of them are like, what? Like it's kind of unrecognizable.
Wow.
Sometimes I need to dig them out and remind myself, don't remember next time you think you're going to eat those Doritos. Remember this? Remember this guy?
Yeah. Hell yeah. Remember the pain.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All
All
right,
right,
man. It
man.
was good talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. It was a good talk. Lots of fun little tangents and everything. Plenty of hot takes.
I did warn you about my penchant for hot takes and tangents.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.